Good morning and welcome to the 33rd meeting of the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee in 2025. Before we begin, can everyone ensure that their electronic devices are switched to silent? Our first item on the agenda today is consideration of SSI on the Rural Support Improvement Miscellaneous Amendments Scotland Regulation 2025. And I welcome to the meeting Jim Fairley, the Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity, and his officials. We've got John Armour, the branch head from the Livestock Production Policy Unit, Emily Williams Boylston, the Solicitor, Alan Elder, the Principal Agriculture Officer, and Paul Neeson, the Head of Mapping and Land Services. And I invite the Minister to make a short opening statement.
Can I first of all give apologies for Alan Elder, who's unable to make it this morning as a family incident.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Committee, for taking the time to consider these draft regulations today. These regulations are proposed to be made using the modified powers conferred by the Agricultural Retained EU Law and Data Scotland Act 2020 that enable us to improve the operation of the assimilated EU law underpinning our common agricultural policy schemes and powers under the Direct Payments EU Regulation No. 1307/2013, which permit amendments to the requirements for ecological focus areas. They will improve the provisions for ecological focus areas by requiring more businesses to undertake EFA activities as a condition of their greening payment, increasing the area of land managed for EFA and to widen the options and choices available for those undertaking these activities. We have committed to providing a replacement legacy Scottish Rural Development Programme scheme as set out in the Vision for Agriculture and the Agricultural Reform Route Map and the Agriculture and Rural Communities Scotland Act 2024. Greening support is required to be modified to align with the route map, phased transition from legacy common agricultural policy schemes into the proposed new support framework. Without the changes made by these regulations, greening would be unable to support the commitment to Tier 2 support set out in the route map. The regulations will also improve the operation of the provisions for the Scottish Suckler Beef Support Scheme by firstly introducing a derogation from the calving interval requirements for smaller businesses in response to concerns raised by smaller producers and the Scottish Crofting Federation, and secondly, extending the end of the application submission period to allow submissions to be made up to the 14th of January following the end of the relevant calendar year. That will make it easier for applications to be submitted in time. These regulations mark a significant point in our progress towards our aims of becoming a world leader in sustainable and regenerative agriculture and delivers on our previous commitments. We got here by co-developing in detail with partners, and this is an approach that I fully endorse. The Government, this Parliament and rural partners all support the Vision for Agriculture. Getting there means that we work together, and getting there means agreeing together, agreeing to longer-term planning and development. Failure to bring these regulations into force would undermine that progress and the efforts and work of many of our farmers and crofters that are already committed to making these improvements. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. In the policy note, it states that with the passing of the Agriculture and Rural Communities Scotland Act and the publication of the Vision for Scottish Agriculture and Agricultural Reform Route Map, the timeline for establishing a new Scottish agriculture policy is now clear. It's my view that it's actually less clear. In fact, it's not clear at all. Back in 2023, the route map quite clearly set out that there would be a launch of enhanced payment structures. We still don't actually know what that's going to look like. But my specific question is, what's the status of the list of measures and what progress has been made towards full enhanced Tier 2 schemes? Because they don't match up with ambitions that were set out in 2023.
I'm going to let Paul start with the answer to that question.
So just to start off with, the list of measures that you're referring to were developed co-developed with stakeholders and others with a view to establishing a list of measures that could be utilised across all of the delivery mechanisms and schemes. So they sit in isolation effectively as part of the wider programme. They're not specifically part of Enhanced. We're using some of these measures and drawing them down for consistency's purposes. So the idea would be that as we move into the development and evolution of the new schemes, under Tier 1, 2, 3 and 4, we'll have a consistent approach to individual measures. So we won't have a scenario where we've had in the past where we would have, for example, field margins that have a different definition depending on what scheme they were delivered under. So that's where we're going with the measures, and the measures have been developed on that basis. A combination of policy officers, operational delivery people, including their offices, and some of our research scientists and some of our nature conservation advisors have been developing those measures. So I hope that gives you a clear understanding of where they're coming from.
It doesn't really. It feels like, and stakeholders have said that very little progress has been made over the last few years. And actually, I'm sure the Minister will recall when we were looking at the Agriculture Bill, and prior to that, that the list of improvements, some of them were brought forward by the climate change groups that brought forward proposals or whatever, and there is frustration that it doesn't appear that any of these measures are being brought forward. And at the start of this year, this committee was concerned about its ability to deal with all the secondary legislation that was going to come forward to put some meat in the bone of the 2025 Act. But what we actually see is it's only skimming the surface. What we're seeing is the 2020 Act being used to further progress greening rather than developing new policies. So what are the barriers to, or what have the barriers been to measures towards the new Tier 2 schemes? Why haven't we seen that develop at pace?
I think what we've always said from day one, Convener, is that we're going to try to do this with the industry at a pace that will allow the industry and those who are actually farming on the ground to come with us at a pace that suits them. Now, you'll be well aware that the NFU have already written to yourselves to say that going to 7% is too fast, and others are telling us that we're going too slow. So what we're trying to do here is have deep, meaningful conversations about what it is that we're trying to achieve. Everybody knows what we're trying to achieve. Everybody knows what it is that we would like to deliver in the vision. It's sustainable regenerative agriculture that allows farmers to continue to produce food, allows rural communities to thrive at the same time as enhancing nature and making sure we protect that biodiversity, we do the emissions reductions that we're trying to do. So everybody has that vision in their head. But getting there with everybody on board is difficult from the point of view that there's always a level of pushback. So we're sitting at an SSI today that I would ask for the committee to clear on the basis of going to 5% for more people in 2026 and then moving to 7% in 2027. And that's to bring more people into the scheme. But already you'll be aware that there are some people saying, hold on, that's too much, that's too fast. But for others, it's not going fast enough. So I think what I'm trying to say is that this is going to take us time to get the community, the farming community that we are asking to do so much, to deliver this at a pace that allows them to keep up with it. And I'm not trying to dodge the answer. It's just making sure that the industry comes with us.
But at some point, you've got to jump off and actually put these policies in place. And from my understanding, back in August 2024, you asked FAST for feedback, not co-development, feedback on your policies. They have provided evidence or feedback, but since then there has been no formal engagement with FAST on where we are. And I know previously that the government's commitment to co-design really hasn't been delivered, and the relationship between the industry and policy level or ministerial level just doesn't exist. So,
no, I would dispute that, Convener. FAST very recently met with senior government officials and policy advisors very recently. There has been engagement. There hasn't always been agreement on what it is that we're trying to do, but there's actually been that conversation. And I'll go back to the fact that also included in this SSI is the CAF scheme, where we've done the derogation. Now, I was under the impression, you will all be very clear on this, you were here, I was under the impression that everything was fine with the 410-day calving interval, but it wasn't. So we took that conversation away, and that's why we introduced the derogation, which is what we're trying to get cleared here today.
But that was a failure, because we heard from the Crofton Commission that they really hadn't been consulted on it.
Well, that's not the case, convener. And I get where you're trying to go with this. We had this conversation at the time where we introduced the SSI for the 410 days. And I was very clear in my understanding that everyone who was requiring to be consulted at that point was on board. At the last minute, it became quite clear that it wasn't. So that kind of goes back to the first point I was making. Making sure that we are always in a place where we've got the industry coming with us, because to me, that's absolutely vital if we're going to be successful here. We got to a point at the very last minute where we weren't going to get that SSI through until I gave a commitment to say, we'll go away and we'll have a look at this because clearly something has gone wrong. Since that point in time, there has been extensive consultation and communication between all of the various groups. So I would dispute the fact that if people are telling you that they haven't been consulted, I just don't buy that.
Okay, thank you. What part does the IT system have in the slow progress in developing these new Tier 2 options?
That's not part of the consideration that I'm thinking about right now at all. What I'm thinking about is how we move from a very limited number of people who are carrying out the EFA greening at the moment, how we get it to 5% for more people, and then how we bring other people in.
Yeah, I suppose, Minister, where my question is coming from, we were expecting more policies that were moving towards a new Tier 2 system. That's what the route map suggested. But we've not seen that. So my question is not about the greening, because that's continuation of the 2020 effectively CAP policy. What barrier has the IT system been in developing these new ambitions for the new Tier 2? I
would say that the biggest barrier to us making progress is making sure that we get the agreement across the industry and the sectors.
Okay, so the IT system is not a barrier?
The IT system is not in my consideration at this moment in time. The biggest consideration at my thinking right now is how we get policies that the industry will buy into, they'll come with us on, and they will actually deliver. And we are using the legacy system that is currently in place.
Okay, thank you. So your ambitions for a brand new Tier 2 scheme still remains?
Our ambition is to create the system that allows the Tiers 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4, which will take us to a point where Scotland becomes a world leader in regenerative agriculture.
Okay, thank you. Tim Eagle.
Is that all right? Minister, you've just talked about... There's a few things in what you've just said. I don't think we've got any answers there, to be frank. This is your programme. This was your route map since 2023. Been working on this for ages. I've spoken to several members of ARIOB, as well as some other key stakeholders. I don't think you are taking people on a journey with you on this. Let's go back. Let's just touch on quickly the IT system there. The IT system is not in my wording just now. That's an interesting choice of words.
So it's not in my thinking.
It's thinking just now. I thought you said words just now. Okay, and you're thinking just now. What do you mean by that? Because originally there was, we can talk about this list of options that were going to be available, a bit like the old LMOs, the land management options. I think there was an understanding amongst various different stakeholders in ARIOB and without that there was going to be, under Tier 2, a much greater list of options that allowed you to become that world leader of sustainable and regenerative agriculture that you're talking about. What we've got is 11/12 options. That doesn't seem very much. So you are giving me an absolute guarantee that it wasn't the IT system that has limited you on the ability to do that at this point?
What I'm giving you is a clear message that what's in my thinking right now is how we take the sector with us by delivering policies that they will buy into. And as I've already stated to the convener, we're asking people to go to 5% in 2026, we're asking people to go to 7% in 2027, and already we're getting pushback. You've seen the letter, the NFU wrote it to you. And that's despite the fact that the NFU have been in the meeting rooms, in the ARIOB, and in more discussions than any other stakeholder. And yet, we're still getting a 7% pushback on the 7%.
So which stakeholder...
So my biggest consideration right now, Mr Eagle, is to make sure that we take the industry with us on any new policy that we're bringing forward.
So which stakeholder is it then that is saying that you can't have an enhanced... What stakeholders is it then that is saying you can't have an enhanced list of options under Tier 2? Why have you only put another 4 in, rather than putting a much wider list of options that was originally proposed?
We've put 4 in at the moment for this in enhanced greening, because those 4 will give us the options that people will be able to buy into to come with us on the journey.
So, but who then? Because my understanding is that most stakeholders originally thought that this was going to be a much greater list of options. And what we've got, and remember, we've been talking about this for years, Minister, years and years and years, and we've got 4 options a month before we're going to put this into place.
You've got 4 extra options, plus all the other ones. Bearing in mind, there are farmers who have been doing this since 2015. There are farmers who absolutely pushed back on doing anything in 2015. Then when they actually got their heads around it and started to implement it, it became much easier and the pushback became 0. We're in the same position again, because we're now asking new farmers to do things that they haven't done before. We're asking them to change, and the additional 4 options is to take into account some of the issues that we have around islands, for instance. So we are listening to what stakeholders are telling us. We're listening to where the issues are. Not everybody is going to get everything that they want out of this. That's just the way it goes. Because I can assure you there are plenty of ENGOs who would tell us we haven't gone nearly far enough. So what we're doing is we're bringing in policies that will allow us to take the industry with us and get us on that journey to make sure that we can deliver the outcomes that we're looking for.
Would you agree with me that an expanded list of options under Tier 2 would do 2 things? One, it would allow farmers and crofters and smallholders and everybody across Scotland to really make sure that they are maximising the benefits to the environment, the benefits to biodiversity, by being able to pull what really works on their farms. Because what works in Orkney, which is actually going to suffer quite significantly under these changes, because lots and lots of new farmers are coming in, crofters are coming in, but also it meets your targets, and an expanded list of options will meet your need to deliver a sustainable and regenerative agriculture of the future. So I want to go back to this IC system again. Are you saying to me then that your plan still is to have an expanded list of options under Tier 2? And is the IT system at this point capable of delivering that in the near future?
Well, first thing I'm going to say is you keep saying your. I hoped that what we had was our. You know, this is supposed to be across all parties. We've all agreed that we're looking at making sure Scotland can deliver the right outcomes. So, by saying your, I presume that maybe you're not on board with that. If you have an expanded list that you would like to put to us, by all means, please send it to me, Mr. Eagle. I'm more than happy to meet you.
It's on your website. You've got an expanded list that I think ARIOB members put forward or proposed to you.
If you've got options that you think should be included in that list, then please put it to us.
It's important to clarify that the list of measures is not a list of options. So that was not, we didn't publish something similar to LMO and say that there was going to be an LMO scheme. The measures are evidence-based measures that we know of the practices that are undertaken by farmers. They can help to reduce emissions intensity, help to improve biodiversity. And so then those are measures that we can wrap into the policy development process and consider whether or not they need new schemes, whether or not they can be part of evolved schemes, to help farmers to deliver the things that the vision says that we want to see them deliver.
I get your point on that, but I think, and there's minutes of the ARIOB in the past, that stakeholders expected an expanded list of options under Tier 2, and we have, apart from the additional 4, we haven't got that, but that's fair enough.
Thank you. Move on to a question from Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Minister. I'm just hearing the conversation about bringing the industry, bringing the farmers, bringing everybody along so that we can achieve these ecological focus areas in a way that works for everybody. And in our briefing papers, we've got information regarding Soil Association, Wildlife Trust, RSPB. They've raised that discussions have taken place on extending greening requirements to permanent grassland. And the SRUC offered a practical view suggesting that a delay in EFA-type measures for permanent grassland would seem prudent, enabling focused implementation of new arable EFA requirements. Now, I'm just interested to hear from you, is part of the pace of change means that permanent grassland has not been progressed as part of the enhanced greening at the moment? And is the Scottish Government planning to progress further measures for businesses which remain out of the current scope of greening?
Well, permanent grassland isn't in the current thinking about the greening options. but we are going to develop schemes as the years go on. But that goes back to the point that I've made to Mr Eagle and to the convener, that will be done in conjunction with intensive discussions with stakeholders to make sure that what we do allows them to be able to come with us. And
in some of my thinking, we have a lot of big dairy farms in Dumfries and Galloway in the southwest of Scotland. 48% of Scotland's dairy herd is in the southwest, and so they need grass for their dairy cattle. And so how do we, or what work is being done to engage with the dairy sector to support them in measures that they need to take for EFAs?
Well, the dairy sector actually, I think I'm right in saying that the dairy sector have considerable amount of EFAs at the moment. There's the arable sector, yes. So the dairy sector already do it, and in their grasslands. So we've got options available for the dairy sector, but anyone who's putting anything into the ground has got the option to add these additional plants, legumes, for instance, into their mix, which allows them to be adapting the policies that we're looking to develop.
Okay.
Do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I think the key points here are we have absolutely undertaken co-development, and we've never, in the time I've been involved in things, engaged so heavily with farmers and crofters with such a change. A number of us were involved in 2015 when greening was first introduced. And some of you remember it was a really difficult transition. The guidance was issued very late in the day on the basis that we only got clarity from Europe at that time and things late in the day. There was lots of real concerns and, for example, many people jumped into the easiest option that was available to them at the time, which was fallow. So we ended up with lots of land that was put into fallow, which wasn't necessarily the right option for individual farmers. We've learned a lot of lessons from that period, and what we've done in the last 18 months is worked very closely with farmers, crofters and agents, and indeed a lot of our practical agricultural officers from the AIR offices, to look at what there are in the measures that exist that we could change to make them more applicable to Scottish conditions. So we've changed a number of the measures and things so that they can have more Scottish-centric. We've identified the individual measures and things which will help them to be able to deliver. So exactly as has been said, farmers who have specific requirements, we've introduced these 4 new measures and things with a view to being able to give them more scope so that they can come in. And in recent months, we've spent a significant amount of time working with agents directly, who many of which are involved in dealing directly with farmers to make sure that they understand what the changes are, how they can help them. We've spent time specifically in Orkney. You mentioned Orkney on the basis of explaining to them the measures, because there's been quite clearly an understandable reaction from farmers when they've gone, oh, greening, I've never done that before, what do I do? This is going to be really difficult. So we've made a point of going out to these people directly so that they're aware in good time as to what the requirements are and the flexibilities that we've built into the system so that they can accommodate these changes within their businesses.
Okay, all right, thanks. Thanks, Convener.
Beatrice Wishart.
Yeah, just when you've mentioned Orkney, could you expand a bit more on what sort of arrangements you've come to with people in the islands?
So I think one of the key things for Orkney is exactly what we said before. There was a very small number of people in Orkney and things who were required to do EFAs. The greening payments are paid to everybody that is in receipt of basic payment scheme as a supplement. And to date and things, there hasn't been a significant number of people in Orkney who have been required to do this because of the exemptions which were applied previously. The exemption's been removed, and the consequence is that there are significant increase in the number of people in Orkney and things that are required to participate in EFA. So the first thing we've done is to try and identify the type of farmer in Orkney and things that would be subject to it, and work with agents and others in Orkney and things to identify the people and things that will be impacted, and then to try and explain to them what options are available to them. There was a bit of misunderstanding at the beginning of the process and things as to how these options would work in an Orkney context. So one of the measures that we've changed and allowed given more flexibility for example, is the undersowing of grass within an arable crop. which allows people to graze this off or to maintain it for winter forage, which is a common practice in Orkney. And there wasn't an understanding and a realisation that that option was available to them. So as we've worked with the individuals in Orkney and things and explained to them what the requirements are, I'm not saying there's been a light bulb moment, but there's certainly been an understanding and things as to what the requirements are, and we've worked very closely with them. The local area office has been a number of events to help farmers and crofters understand the requirement. There's been a number of public meetings across the islands in Orkney and things to help people understand as part of this transition to the new arrangement. So, as I say, part of the lessons learned from 2015 was that actually if you've not been involved in EFAs before, this will come as potentially a new requirement, and it's about getting the people on the ground to understand what the commitments are that they're required to undertake. So we've worked very heavily, and I think with a lot of goodwill and things in Orkney from the feedback I've had and things on the basis of helping them understand what the requirements are and get them into a position where they are ready to implement. And we know from the cropping requirements from the local office and things that people are already taking significant steps to prepare themselves for the 2026 requirements.
I mean, SRUC pointed out that the changes will be felt differently in different parts of Scotland, and Orkney and Shetland are two separate islands. And I noticed Shetland Islands Council had raised concerns about a lack of regard for the Islands Scotland Act 2018. So could you expand on that?
I can give you an example on the basis of, I mean, I've personally worked in Shetland in the Northern Isles for a number of years. I was there for 11 years as an agricultural officer and others, so I'm very familiar with the working in the islands and the others. But a practical example of where we've worked with people is that in Benbecula in the Western Isles, as you'll be aware and things, there's a lot of arable cropping that goes on the Machars. And we're extremely keen to make sure that practical practices that are unique to the islands and things are not disrupted. So we've specifically made reference to EFAs and things on the Machars to allow flexibility and things in there, recognising that there is a practice that's undertaken there which is unique to the islands and things, and allowing them to address their EFA requirements in a particular way. So I hope that gives you assurance and things that we are listening to the needs of island communities and working with them to make sure and things that we can implement things which are practical and pertinent to their specific circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alistair Allen.
Thank you, Convener. You mentioned, Minister, about, or you're alluding to anyway, some of the expected benefits of including additional EFA options or EFA measures, not sure which, in making changes to these requirements. Can you say a bit more about the government's purpose behind this and the outcomes it's looking for?
The purpose behind it is to, get us to that point where that vision for the kind of agriculture we want to do in Scotland. But specifically, if you're going to plant legumes in your grass, it's a nitrogen-fixing crop, so you're fixing nitrogen, so therefore going to be losing. You should be using less nitrogen. I particularly like the one of small-scale tree planting, so we can try and get away from this narrative of trees bad on farms. If we can get integrated tree planting on farms, then that is an option as well. Herbaceous crops, doing mixed crops, getting away from the monoculture. So all of that is going to benefit biodiversity. If you've got a field of clover in the summer, generally it's buzzing with bees and pollinators all over it. But if you've got a single monocrop of ryegrass, there's very few bees on it. So it's just, it sounds very simplistic, but it's things like that that are going to help us to develop the biodiversity that we are looking to enhance and to get back to where it has been in the past. Because a lot of these things that we're doing are things that used to be done anyway. A lot of these things that we're doing, like, wintering stock on arable places was a thing that was done previously and it stopped happening. So it's a little bit of going back to the future kind of thing.
So to achieve those ends and to that biodiversity or that lack of monoculture, are you talking in that case, are the government talking about things like removing dates that crops must not be harvested, or increasing field margins, or what other measures are the government actually promoting to achieve that end?
Well, we're asking farmers to look at their own particular circumstances, how their farm works, how their farm functions, what they need to do with it, and look at the options that are available to them. And it could be increased field margins, it could be tree planting, it could be adding nitrogen-fixing crops, green cover. It's all of these options. The whole point of this, and it goes back to what I said right at the start, we need the farming community to say, right, okay, I'm going to buy into this. How am I going to make it work for me? And if there are other things that we need to add to a list of options that's available to people, then we're more than happy to look at that, because we want people to get behind this and work with us.
And finally, Convener, you mentioned an example from my constituency and other places of a Machar landscape. I suppose the interesting thing for me there is in the context of these measures, what's actually being done, or what will be done to recognise existing practices that involve low impact or low intensity agriculture there and in other parts of the country. So how flexible is what you're proposing in terms of recognising the good practice that already exists in that?
So I think there's a few things to say there. The new measure that we've introduced for the extensive grassland is specifically addresses that. So that'll help some of your constituents and will be really attractive to them. To pick up the point that you asked on the last one, just to add to the Minister's comments and things, is one of the things that we've done or been very conscious of is that in the last number of years we've had a lot of criticism laid at us on the basis of, for example, the seeds that you can use in some of the seed mixtures, because they've not been pertinent to Scotland, and we've been very constrained because of the regulations that we were working on under before, that we couldn't actually introduce some of them. So we've worked with a lot of the seed suppliers, with a lot of the agents in Scotland, across Scotland, to review some of the measures and things and the options that are available, and introduce flexibility on the seeds and others that can be introduced as part of these seed mixtures. And the benefit of this will be that the measures that they're asked to do before, they will still do them, but the flexibility will be that the productivity from these mixtures will be more suitable for Scottish conditions. So actually the impact of doing these EFAs in Scotland will be less per business. The biodiversity benefit will be better, and we'll get a win-win situation, so the impact on the business is less and the outcome from the policy objectives is increased. So I think, and it's a moving target. I think the other thing I'd like to say is that, we're very much in listening mode on the basis that we've done a lot of co-development with this, but we're also conscious in things that, things might come out the woodwork in the next 2 or 3 years that we're happy to look at with the measures and the options that we're implementing specifically. So if there's more that we can learn and there's more that we can do, we would certainly change or look to review the guidance as we go along to make sure that we're working with farmers to the best outcome.
Thank you.
We briefly touched on fuel margins. What was the basis for moving from 1 metre to 3 metres? Was that based on scientific research?
So that was strong advice from our colleagues in Nature, Scott, on the basis that the value of expanding the field margins significantly increases the biodiversity benefits and things we get from that option.
Was there any consideration given to the huge variation in field sizes? So if you've got, down in my patch, if you've got a 25-acre field, that's considered quite big. But on the East Coast, that's very small. So the impact of a 3-metre margin is significant in a small field rather than a big. Was there any consideration to having some other sort of mechanism to ensure you got the benefits of the field margin without actually taking away what potentially could be a significant part of a productive piece of land?
So just to be clear on two bits, as far as field margins are concerned, there is a requirement to have a field margin next to hedges and other living features as part of GEEC and cross compliance. The EFA requirement for a field margin is calculated into an area basis. So effectively, if the farmer chooses to use that option, and it's optional, he doesn't have to, but if they choose to use that option, clearly they don't have to have the same linear length. It's the total area of the option that's important. So from our perspective and things, the impact on the farmer of actually doing a wider thing won't have an adverse effect on the smaller ones, because they don't have to have the same linear length.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Tim Eagle.
Thank you. So can I just quickly talk about the 7% up to 7% increase? So next year, maintain 5% with the 4 new options. From 2027, go to 7%. Now, there's NFUS has very significant concerns about that. They feel that they need a review whether there's a proportional environmental benefit. I recognise, though, that some environmental groups have suggested that actually we should go further. Can you just talk to us about how you decided on that 7% in 2027 and why that timeline?
It was very much a compromise. we are being pushed to go a lot further. But this is very much a compromise because we're having these conversations. And I've read the NFU letter. I understand their concerns. I disagree with them. And we are pushing ahead with the 7% as long as this committee is in agreement in order to allow us to reach the targets that we are trying to do, to be that, you know, regenerative agriculture has to be the thing that we're aiming at. So, and this goes back to the point I was making right at the start. You know, people are, yeah, we want to do this, but just not now, and just not that amount, and you know, let's just not do this. So it's a little bit frustrating that we've had this pushback from the NFU, but we are committed that we're going to have to move forward, and we've asked people. We will absolutely listen to you. We will hear what the concerns are, but we're going to move forward to this vision for agriculture, which we have all signed up to, and this is part of that journey. So it's just indicative of the fact that we are going to have difficulties getting people to where we want everyone to be, but that 7% was a compromise.
So the 7% isn't based on any sort of scientific rigour or advice from environment. It's purely a compromise figure.
It's purely a compromise on the basis that 5% was doing a decent job, 7% will improve that even more, 10% will go even further, depending on what your objectives are. And the 7% we felt was a stable, suitable compromise to reach at this stage.
And why? Because in fairness to NFUS's point, it is generally farmers, crofters, smallholders, etc., that are delivering on the ground with this. And there is a risk potentially to their farm viability, how they fit this in with livestock production, etc., which is many. So nobody's questioning the need to do environmental benefits on farm. I think we can all get that. In fact, I agree with you on some of the points around having fields of red and white clover that have butterflies in the summer, but actually making sure we do that in a way that doesn't risk farms. So if NFUS are coming out and saying, look, pause this for a year, maybe do a review, double check that this is actually proportional and it works, and then we can come back to that figure, why would you not take that option?
Because we know that it works. We can see that these enhancements are actually having an effect. I spent a lot of my time going round farms who are actually already employing these at the current levels, and there is massive biodiversity gain. So we want everybody to get on board with that and start pushing towards that. But as I said, this is indicative of that. Yes, everybody's agreeing, but just not me and just not now. So we're having to make some fairly tough decisions. This is a moderate change. This is not a massive change. It's a moderate change, and we are asking farmers to just get behind it, look at the options that make the... I heard the point that you made about the viability. That's why we've included other options. That's why we're saying undersowing. That's why we're saying add legumes to your grass mixture. We're giving people alternatives and options to be able to get behind this. And I don't think it's unreasonable, given the fact that we are putting £142 million of public money into the greening system, that we're asking people to do a little bit more for it, because it's a huge amount of public money. And you know, if you look at the island, the Orkney in particular, currently there are only 11 farmers using that system. This new bringing it in will increase that by another 200. So there's a fairness as well, that there's a lot of people that are already doing it. There's also this thing about, we've got some farmers who may be sitting there. I'm going to give a crude example here. Two farmers sitting side by side, 500 acres, but one of them has permanent grassland, so therefore they don't have to do any EFA, but the one next door, because they don't have large hectareage of permanent grassland, don't have to do any EFA, and that's just simply not fair. So we need everybody to be carrying the weight of this, and pushing it to 7% after 2026, I don't think is unreasonable, given the amount of money that's going into it.
I guess, though, there is a point, isn't there, that it's quite crude to look at farms in that way, because not only have we got enhanced greening under Tier 2, but there'll be a lot of farms that are in the Scottish Rural Development Programmes, EEC schemes, etc., as well, and there'll be farms that are organic. So every different farm will be doing their own environmental work, and I think many farmers out there and crofters and smallholders are doing a lot of good environmental work. So are you intending, I suppose this goes back to my frustration earlier on, that if you had an expanded options list under Tier 2, then farmers really could have been able to pick exactly what works on their farm to the benefit of the nature on their farm, rather than having a smaller group, which maybe restricts them. So when we're talking about farm viability, then, are you Are you, well, I suppose two questions then. One, are you looking to go above the 7% at any point in the future? And two, do you foresee introducing more different options before that 7% comes into effect in 2027?
What we currently have is a target to introduce the 7% in 2027, and that's currently where it sits. That will be developed as we move forward. There'll have to be a lot of discussion if we're ever going to move that forward in any, if we're going to move that percentage up the way. In terms of options, the options that are there at the moment we feel are enough to allow farmers to be able to tap into that, to reach that 7%. But more than happy, as we said, this is an ongoing process. And the more conversation you had, the more options that we can bring forward that farmers can tap into. I'm more than happy to have a look at all of that.
Can I ask one more question on this? Just in terms of how this works on the ground practically, to what extent, because obviously you do inspections every year, to what extent, as we go through this period of time, are you going to relax the rigour by which you put any penalties in place as farmers and shofters adapt to this over the next couple of years? Are you prepared to be a little bit more lenient as farmers transition?
I'll let you answer that.
Well, I think the answer to that question is that if we're having farmers who are breaching these regulations, the answer is that we've not introduced them properly. Our intention is to try and avoid the breaches and anomalies arising by delivering the guidance early in the system, ensuring that farmers or crofters are aware of the requirements that they have, and working with them to make sure they understand the rules and regulations they've got. So there are no specific arrangements and things to diminish the consequence of breaching the regulations. Our target is to make sure that people are aware and sufficiently notified of these changes so that they can make the right choices in the first place. And we're spending a significant amount of time doing that. We have access, farmers and crofters have a number of sources of information. They will quite often go to their land agents or to their agents and work with them. So we've done a lot of work working with land agents to make sure that they understand what the requirements are and make sure that people are aware of them beforehand. We make the AIR offices available to people both at the AIR offices, and we've had them at various shows and markets and things, explaining to people what the rule requirements are and things. And the real thing that would be a success this time round is that I mentioned before in 2015 the guidance was very late going out. We've put the guidance out this year in June, 6 months before the requirements there. We have spent a lot of time explaining to people, when they've read the guidance, if there's things they're not sure of, we've engaged with them and things to help them understand which they are. And we don't want them to fall into the scenario of saying, what's the easiest thing to do, as they did in the last time, and just put in EFA fallow. We want them to consider what the options are on their farm, consider which will work best for them. And we think with the options that we've provided with them, there's lots of scope for individual farms to make choices that are pertinent to their individual circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ariane Burgess.
Thanks very much, Convener. Yeah, I'm certainly aware of really great examples of farmers and crofters that are already leading the way around ecological restoration work. Murray Farm Cluster, for example, up by me. But what I'd be interested to understand, Paul, you've described really well your thinking around how farmers can engage with ecological focus areas and all that. But how will farmers be supported in the first instance to actually get going to establish an ecological focus area?
So effectively, apologies for repeating myself, but a lot of it is about early engagement and making them aware of it. We've offered the facility from AIR offices to go out and do practical demonstrations on farms. We've engaged with other agents. Unfortunately, Alan Elder, who's not with us today, unfortunately is one of the team, has led and been at more than half a dozen meetings of agents and things to explain the new requirements, help them understand the details of the new arrangements. We spent a lot of time early in the process with some of the seeds providers and things to make sure that the seed mixtures and things that we were going to implement this year were more workable in a Scottish context, so that when we present those to farmers, they have a more affinity to the seeds that we were doing. There was a sense before that they did EFA because it was the easy option. we want to get to a point where these other measures and these other options are more attractive to them and they can use them. And we think we've got a good way forward with that in making sure that the relaxation in some of the rules or the amendments in the rules with these ones will make these far more practical for farmers in Scotland.
And in terms of reassuring farmers who have concerns about making these changes, what are you doing with them in particular?
So the first point in things would always be reference to the guidance. We're really keen in things that farmers and crofters read the guidance so they understand what options are available to them. We're always available in things within our network of AIR offices. The 16 AIR offices around the countryside are all open, and we would encourage people who have any doubts or concerns and things to come in and speak to us. We have a very good relationship with farmers and crofters on the ground, particularly through the AIR office network. They're often more comfortable coming and speaking to a local agricultural officer and things to get an understanding of what's going on. And that's something that we would very much continue and do emphasise for people to come in and speak to us face to face.
Are you involving any peer-to-peer exchange?
There's work in particularly in Orkney and things we mentioned before, whereby we've put people out and things on the ground. We've funded a number of public meetings and things there on the basis that people can see things on the ground. We have done other arrangements whereby we would host potential open days or practical things as we did in 2015 if there was a demand for it.
Okay, that sounds good. So once they all get going, what's the government doing to monitor the impact both on the environmental, ecological changes and potentially any business challenges that might arise?
So there's two separate elements to that. There's a monitoring and evaluation of the whole programme. So there's separate work that's going on with a number of experts in the field on the basis of monitoring and value across all of the different key deliverables or outcomes they're looking for, biodiversity, business, etc. So that's being done at the wider thing on a specific EFA type. We will be engaging with stakeholders, agents and others and things basically from now on the basis of trying to identify lessons learned on the basis of there's any difficulties in people implementing these things. We'll be putting people out on the ground, not just as part of inspections, but actually to get feedback and things on how people have implemented these schemes from next summer and beyond and things, with a view to specifically seeing if we need to refine the guidance or other elements that go with them to make sure that they're understandable and things.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I've got another question which is around the fertiliser and lime plan requirements. So I'm interested actually to understand if the government is confident that that plan. Well, I'm interested actually to understand why you're bringing in these plans, why you're bringing these changes, and yeah, I'll just start there.
So I was interested in specifically the changes you're referring to and things. I mean, we're trying to align, so we've made some amendments to fertiliser and lime, we've made some amendments to the mapping requirements and other elements. The key element here is to avoid bureaucracy, to be perfectly honest. What we want the farmers to do is to have a one-stop shop. We don't want them to be having multiple examples or versions of maps or plans and things. If we can align them as the programme moves forward so they're only having to produce one version at a time. So the lime and fertiliser that you have on your farm is clearly really important, but we don't think it's appropriate that they have three versions of the same thing in different formats. It's more important things that we align them all together and things. So I'm not sure specifically, but that's the overarching policy driver behind it.
Okay, and is there any connection to the whole farm plans? Also, kind of that being taken forward in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're speaking to the whole farm plan, and that was, so the example I can give you and things is around about the mapping requirement and things for EFAs. Within the whole farm plan, we're looking for people to do mapping of habitats and other things. They're still required to retain a map of their EFAs on the farm. So if we go out and do an inspection, we can clearly identify where all the bits are within a field. And all the other bits, but we don't think there's a requirement and things for people to be producing multiple maps and things are showing us the same information on multiple occasions. Okay,
so we're still, between now and 2028, when whole farm plans are fully required, there's still mapping requirements for fertiliser and lime plans, but just in one way, the coherence you're talking about.
As I understand it, things, the requirement won't be compulsory in all elements. But those people who are already doing it have reaped the benefits and understand, and many are now doing it along with their carbon audits and their soil sampling and others. So there's a real momentum now behind understanding You know, what is the soil analysis in your farm, how that fits in with your soil and lime and fertiliser and things, and that will transition to a point where it's all structured within the whole farm plan.
Okay, thanks very much.
Alistair Allen.
Thank you, Convener. Just briefly to return at some of the previous discussion, you mentioned, Minister, earlier on that some of this will be new to some farmers and crofters. So I just wonder if you can say a little bit about what you do to make the process as simple and as lacking in burden as possible, particularly for smaller farm units and crofts.
I think the point that Paul has just made is exactly that. There has been extensive engagement right across the country. There have been ARPID colleagues working at all the shows right across the country, asking people to engage with the process so that they understand what it is that's coming. The government has been very clear. I think I've said it a number of times in this committee and in other public forums, that people need to get themselves into the mindset that these changes are coming and that they need to start being aware of what they are. And the ARPID teams and the Scottish Government teams have been available. There has been extensive consultation, extensive ability for people to be able to find out the information. So we're making it as simple as possible. But ultimately, the farmers have to get engaged. They're the ones who will have to take the decision that they're going to get that information, because it's part of what they're going to do as they're going forward.
Thank you.
Tim Eagle.
A few more questions, if I can, Minister, because I just have fundamental concerns. I mean, we've been talking, the government has been talking about this with stakeholders for years and years and years and years, and I still feel it's a bit like smoke and mirrors. I think we're going around in circles. We're not getting the options out there. Just on the ambition for a new, the original ambition, my understanding was for a new Tier 2, an enhanced green, not enhanced greening as it is now, but a whole new Tier 2. Is that still your ambition to deliver, and on what timeline?
The ambition is to deliver the whole farm plan, is to deliver the sustainable regenerative agriculture. That's what the vision is. What we'll do with Tier 2 is being worked upon. We've kept the basic payments, as you know.
Yeah.
We're adding things in, like the calving interval, the work on peatlands, the EFAs. We're developing it as we go along. And I'm not quite sure what it is that the problem is in terms of letting people know what we're doing. Paul's just outlined how much engagement there's been to bring in this one particular part. So we're moving our farming community to a place where they can actually be part of this whole process. We've seen what happened down south. The decisions were made that this is what we're going to do. It was a cliff edge, and numerous people fell out of that system completely because it didn't align with how they could then farm. So we're doing this in this, what seems like a staged way, and I absolutely accept that it's staged, but it should be staged to allow people time to adapt it and come to it in a way that allows them to develop their own processes.
Do you think the SNP, obviously the Scottish Government, have this sort of rule, don't they, whereby you are following EU legislation and rules that come into place? Is that holding us back, do you think, in terms of the way we will move forward with our agricultural policy?
No.
No. You think, but we are keeping in step with them, aren't you, at every turn?
There is a policy of alignment, but no, that's not what that is not a problem in terms of.
So you are 100% confident that you can specifically target your agricultural policy to the needs of Scottish farmers, crofters and smallholders without risk by following EU legislation and rules?
There's got nothing to do with EU legislation.
Well, it is, because the Scottish Government have a policy whereby they follow EU rules and legislation.
What we're doing is we're developing a Scottish-based agricultural support system, which is what we're delivering just now.
Okay. And then finally, just in terms of respect of Parliament, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, I've not been here that long, but you put this out to farmers months ago. A letter came through my door. I should actually declare a registered interest as a small farmer. But we are only debating this now. Now, the implementation comes in for fallow, for example, on the 1st of January. So it all does for EFAs. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's right, that we as a committee, as Parliament, only get to discuss this a month before it's implemented, whilst you told everybody else months and months ago? Do you think that shows respect to Parliament?
Yeah, I do. I think it shows respect to Parliament. I think we've delivered it in the timescale that we've been required to deliver it in. I think what's more important is the farming community have the time that they need to actually be able to do what we're asking them to do.
If we voted against it today, though, could be a problem, couldn't it?
Could be, yeah.
So you just make the assumption you'll get it through?
That would be entirely up to the committee to decide whether or not they want to vote against it, and that will be your decision. And then you'll have to answer for that yourself.
We're going to move on to the suckler beef supports system. But again, your policy note does suggest to deliver on the agriculture reform route map commitments, which include the phased approach to transitioning between SRDP and the new support. And it's necessary to introduce changes to greening as a proxy for Tier 2 or enhanced support. So I'm going to ask the question again because I'm still not clear. Are you still committed to a new Tier 2 scheme?
The Tier 2 scheme is already there. We're starting to develop the Tier 2 scheme. This is part of the Tier 2 scheme.
Well, but what we're seeing today is just sorting some things out in greening. So it's not new policy.
It's also bringing the derogation for the calving interval for small producers. So
we're looking at farmers and land managers at the moment having no idea what happens after 2027. That's a year.
Sorry,
so what is in the pipeline? What are you currently developing? And when will it become clear the direction of travel? Because we're focused on 2027. Some of these policies are coming in for the 7%, but there's nothing else. It's completely void of any other options or whatever. So can you tell us what you expect to deliver in 2027?
We've delivered,
in a year's time.
What we're delivering is exactly what we're debating right now. That is the enhanced greening proposals that we're putting forward just now. We've delivered the. You're saying that there's a void. We're making substantial changes. We've made the whole farm plan. We've made the requirements for the whole farm plan. We've made the calving interval. We made the peatlands changes. We have made the calving interval. So we're making substantial changes. And if you're the farmer on the ground who's actually delivering this is going to feel a little bit different to what it might feel sitting in this committee. These people are actually going to have to deliver this on the ground. So
these have all been developed.
To the point that I said right at the start, we're asking our farming community to come with us on this journey. We are making this as simple as we possibly can. We're giving them as much support as we possibly can, and we will keep on delivering these changes that we're asking them to come with us on as the time progresses, in conjunction with the conversations that we have with the sector.
But unless I'm mistaken, nearly all this is delivered under the 2020 Act.
Yeah.
And we're yet to see new policies developed under the 2025. And we can only see as far as 2027. That is 1 year's time. What else is in development to deliver after 2027?
There are considerations that we will be taking forward with ARIOB and with stakeholders, looking at how we increase the biodiversity gain and the carbon emissions gain through farming.
So when are we likely to get an idea of what that might look like? Because again, we've got 1 year, and a year's not a lot of time.
That will be delivered as we develop it.
Okay, so you don't have any indication of what's been developed just now that potentially could come in after 2027?
No, what I'm talking about is what we're debating today is the requirement to change our greening from bring more people into the greening at 5% and then deliver the 2027, the 7% in 2027. Okay,
so that's in isolation to anything else you're developing?
At this moment in time, that's what I'm discussing.
1 year out?
Yeah.
Okay. Rhoda Grant.
Thank you. And I think we welcome the derogations with the calving intervals in this legislation, but I'm wondering, when you're considering those derogations, whether you considered further derogations for herds with maybe just one bull, or who are dependent on the Crofton Cattle Improvement Scheme, or indeed those that lived on islands and were dependent on weather and ferries to get bulls across.
We considered all of the things that you've just talked about, ferries. We had extensive discussions about all of these things, and we looked at a couple of different options. We potentially looked at front loading, but we came to the conclusion that the derogation was the best way to go. That was the least threatening one to particularly the island communities, because we want to make sure that our island communities continue to produce calves. particularly given the fact that we have a Scottish bull stud, which I've visited, and there's some absolutely cracking bulls in there. So there's some tremendous calves coming off the islands from small herds, and we want to be able to continue to see that happening. And these cattle are delivering biodiversity again at the same time. So when we looked at the options that were available to us, John will maybe talk more about what the front loading could have looked like, but we took the decision that the derogation was the best way to go. John.
Yeah, so I suppose on the question around herds with only one bull, I mean, some people know that that could be a relatively large herd that could only have one bull, and that's up to the producer in terms of how many bulls they have to service their herd. Clearly, with this, with the change that we introduced in 2025 to put the calving interval conditionality in place, the impetus for that is to recognise people who are taking steps to mitigate against excess emissions in their livestock systems. And so there's an impetus there. I mean, all this is driven by the climate emergency and the impetus to reduce carbon emissions intensity from livestock systems. With regards to those who are getting bulls from the bull stud, so the cattle improvement scheme, we view that as a support that's available to those farmers to help to improve their systems, to help to make sure that they are with other cows having a calf every year as much as possible. Again, so that's linked to the conditionality. We developed the options following discussions, and we had discussions along the way with the Scottish Crofting Federation, and the main way in which they talked about a solution was around a sort of a derogation front-loading option, so particularly on the number of cows or the number of calves. The derogation that we've went for, the 10-calf derogation, means that there's a guaranteed level of support to smaller producers, even if none of their cows are able to meet that calving interval conditionality. Whereas a front-loading option would have been to essentially give a higher rate for the first number of calves, but that would have meant that if a crofter, for example, had a situation where they weren't able to have a calf within the 410 days because of a ferry issue or a bull issue, they still would be able to get a level of support based on those 10 calves that would be applied for under the derogation. So they could apply those 10 calves and get support that way.
So I'm getting a wee bit concerned now, sorry. I thought there would still be a derogation if something went wrong, like a ferry for a larger herd, or some, because that was we were given that as an explanation when this first came out, that people could apply for a derogation if their bull was sterile, if the ferry didn't run at the right time. So are you saying now the only thing that would be left to people who find themselves in a situation where something totally unplanned has happened is that they could only claim for 10 calves?
So force majeure exceptional circumstances criteria would apply. So that's where people can essentially contact the department and say that they've had something outside of their control which has impacted their ability to meet the eligibility criteria, and that would be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, that's reassured.
Beatrice Wishart.
Yeah, it's just, looking at the response from Shetland Islands Council, and they welcome the derogation for small herds, but they have flagged up their concern that the limit of 10 calves would lead to a general herd reduction in the islands, and obviously the ongoing impact that would have in the situation with the wider supply chain. And I also note that there was an impact assessment done. I wonder if you could expand on that.
I'm not sure why Shetland Islands Council think that the derogation would lead to... repeat what you said, sorry?
Yeah, it's about leading to general herd reduction and people having smaller herds, and the cumulative effect that that would have of multiple herds being reduced.
Okay, I'm not... Do you have any indication as to why that would be the case, John?
No, I don't understand why that would be the case. I think that, in particular, what the change that we implemented this year does is it will result in a higher payment rate per calf. So actually, there's an impetus for producers to try and get more calves born per year, so that they've not got those excess emissions from barring cows, essentially. So there's that, and then also, the analysis that was carried out in 2023 that was published to support the initial calving interval reform indicates that Shetland actually has got quite a high proportion of cows meeting the calving interval that we set at 410 days, meeting that threshold, which would suggest that producers on Shetland may be in a position to receive more money than they were under the scheme previously if they have more calves meeting that calving interval condition.
And the impact assessment, did that come out with that information?
Well, so the impact assessment was, it was on this 10 calf derogation, and the impact of it that we considered on that was that it was more favourable to smaller and island producers because, as we said, it does provide protection against some of those things that might mean that they wouldn't have been eligible for sport when we only had the 410-day calving interval threshold without the derogation being in place.
Okay.
Thank you. Tim Eagle.
So I suspect, Minister, your answer to this will be yes, but I want to express the seriousness of it. So monitoring the impact of this scheme, I think, particularly for those small producers that are maybe just over that 10 cow limit, I expect you will monitor the impact. But in all seriousness, once it kind of leaves committee in Parliament, you kind of have full responsibility and charge for this. So can we get that guarantee that you will monitor this really carefully, and if problems do come up, as Beatrice Witchart has just suggested, that actually you'll bring that back to Parliament, or you'll potentially give us an update via letter or something to say what you could potentially do to change this in the future?
We always monitor the schemes that we're doing, so yes, there will be a monitoring of how this has effect on the national herd, how it affects individual producers. Yeah, that will be done.
Okay.
Ariane Burgess.
Thanks. Just very briefly, so we were talking about this SSI around a year ago, and you made the commitment to bring this in, which is great to see that that's happened, but it has taken a long time. And I just have a bit of concern, and I hear all this morning a lot of what's been said is we are taking the community, we're taking farmers and crofters with us. But I do have a bit of a concern that if something gets overlooked, it takes quite a long time to actually sort the situation out and make sure that people who are crofters in this case are concerned that they've had quite a long time waiting to see this happen. I remember you making the commitment in the chamber to do it. So I'm flagging that up as a concern that of the kind of like, as we make these changes, we need to make sure we've got everybody covered, because otherwise it could take a while to pick people up who've been forgotten.
Duly noted. As far as I can tell, the announcement that we would do the derogation gave the comfort to the community that we'd actually taken on board what the concerns were. But I'll take the point on board that you've made.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question about mapping. This SSI also suggests that you just need to have a map. You don't have to provide that. But given we've seen issues in the past where satellite imaging or whatever has been interpreted wrong, and some farmers have lost a significant percentage of their single farm payment because of tractor tracks through a wet field that actually they've been taken out of the claim and whatever. Has consideration been given to potential retrospective penalties on maps that are not up to date and the issues that might surround that?
I'll hand that to Paul.
So I think the key issue here is to address exactly the point that you're making. Previous to the changes that we've made, if the farmer failed to submit an EFA map, they were subject to penalties. And that was part of the European regulation that we were part of before. And again, when we've looked at what the requirements are and what the benefits are, we've concluded that there's two things that are important. One is the farmer needs to have the information and can have that for themselves, and they can demonstrate where they are when they're there. And the other one is that we can capture it where it's appropriate. And we don't think that that's been a useful way of using the reductions and exclusions. So we've removed that requirement, so we avoid the scenario where the farmer has done his 3 or 4 hectares of EFA or 2 hectares of EFA and loses a proportion of the money just because they haven't submitted a map. So the idea now would be that if our inspector or somebody goes out and wishes to see the information, we would expect the farmer to be able to provide us with the information. But if they didn't submit the map and things with the SAF form and the others, they wouldn't subject to a penalty. Okay. So it's exactly to address these. I'd also have to take slight issue. I have responsibility for the mapping services and things within ARPID and things as well. It's a common myth and things that, significant things around about the mapping and things result in large penalties. That is very rarely the case. We absolutely update and maintain our maps. And actually, one of the mechanisms that we've used in recent years to reduce our running costs is actually to maintain and update the maps on a more regular basis. And we run an annual LIPAS quality assurance assessment of the mapping system that can demonstrate that our maps are accurate within a certain tolerance. And that actually allows us to reduce the number of farm visits that we have on the ground. So we are using modern technology such as satellite imagery. We're using algorithms to check the satellite imagery against existing mapping and things to check that our maps are accurate. And what we hope we're trying to do is if we can provide the accurate information to the farmer in the first place, they avoid making a mistake. So it's about trying to get the information to the farmer that is correct in the first place, and then they don't make a mistake and we don't have any reductions and exclusions that apply.
Okay, thank you. Just from a committee point of view, as a convener of a committee, I still have issues that we've got an SSI that covers more than one issue. And whilst we absolutely welcome the derogation, and it was something that was quite controversial, I remember when you were in front of us last year, Minister, and we called for those derogations to be looked at, given the concerns from crofters and small cattle managers. We're left in the situation today where there's part of this instrument that there'll be universal support for, but there's also parts of the instrument which there is significant concern as brought to us by stakeholders. Was there no consideration given to splitting this into more than one statutory instrument so that members of the committee had the ability to approve them on the basis of whether they thought they were proportionate or not?
Not as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Any further? Tim?
Just one final question. I was just trying to find the notes, actually, and I can't find it. But back in, I think it was March, we had a round table, didn't we, with various members of the agricultural industry, included some members of ARIOB. And there was some positive remarks there, but there were some pretty scathing remarks there as well about how they felt they had been treated in this process. You've made a lot of comments today around a pace that suits them in terms of talking about farmers, taking people with you. How do you I just want to double check, because I am concerned that this is quite late in the day, that the reform route map that was set out isn't really coming to pass in quite the way we all imagined it would. How can you give me certainty, given what I heard back in March, that actually ARIOB is working and that stakeholders do feel included in this process?
All I can tell you is that if they don't feel included, I don't know what conversations they've been having. They're in the room, they're talking to us, they're giving us their information, they're giving us their views very strongly.
But are you listening?
I would suggest that given the fact that this is 7% we're going to, not 10% or 20%, yes, I would say we're listening. Given the fact that we are doing a derogation for calves, I would say yes, we are listening. I can't give you any more demonstration than I've already given you, Mr Eagle.
Okay.
Finally, Minister, again, I'm going to refer to the policy note. Greening support is required to be modified to align with the route map phase transition from legacy CAP schemes into the proposed new support framework. And it also states the timeline for establishing a new Scottish agriculture policy is now clear. But it's not. That's the point. It's only clear up to 2027, and that's only to do with greening. So when will we see that clear timeline, which has changed significantly from 2023, to give some clarification on where we're likely to be at the end of 2027?
Well, I think you have to look at this in the context of the whole programme, Convener. We are developing policies that we're delivering stage by stage in order to bring the community with us, which is what I think that we're doing today, is delivering that as we go forward. So in that context, we know what we're doing up till 2027, but farmers know that this will develop as we go forward up to 2030.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No. Thank you very much. We now move on to formal consideration of the motion to approve the instrument. And I invite the Minister to speak to and move motion S6M 19325.
Moved, Convener.
Does any member wish to debate the motion? No. Is the committee content to recommend approval of this instrument? No. We're not agreed. We'll proceed to a vote. Those in favour of the motion, please raise your hand now. Those who are against the motion, please raise your hands now. Those wishing to abstain. And the result of the vote is 4-7, 2 against, no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed. Thank you. Finally, is the committee content to delegate authority to me to sign off the report on this instrument? Thank you. That completes our consideration of the instrument. I now suspend the meeting for 5 minutes to allow a changeover of witnesses. I suspend this meeting. We're now going to move on to formal consideration of. I'm just checking where we are. So our next item on the agenda is consideration of the draft sheep carcass classification and price reporting Scotland Regulation 2025. And I welcome back to the meeting Jim Fairley, the Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity, and his officials, Michelle Cahoon, Head of Livestock Product Policy, and Mairead McCrossan, a lawyer. And I invite the Minister to make a short opening statement.
Good morning again, Convener, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak about the sheep carcass classification and price report in Scotland Regulations 2025. This draft instrument seeks to introduce mandatory sheep carcass classification and price reporting for abattoirs which process above the threshold of 500 sheep per week on a rolling annual average. The regulations will align sheep and cattle with cattle and pigs, as well as with the EU regulations, including the use of the Europe grid, the system which licensed classifiers use to grade carcasses, which underpins the payments to farmers. These regulations are in response to an industry review, and subsequent consultation has shown that both producers and processors are supportive of the move to align sheep classification rules with beef and pigs. So we want to see a more transparent, productive and efficient sheep market, and these regulations will ensure that farmers are paid a fair price based on the quality of their sheep, with prices reported and made publicly available. The standardisation of classification will then help producers to rear lambs that will help fit the market specifications and consumer demand. Many plants across the UK already carry out sheep classification on a voluntary basis, including those which are likely to meet the threshold figure in Scotland. The regulations will therefore result in little or no cost to businesses, and the licensing of classifiers by government inspectors is free of charge. Coming into force, dates are aligned across the UK, with the exception of Northern Ireland, which will follow 1 month later. This was the main point highlighted in the consultation responses, that to operate sensibly, the system must be implemented simultaneously across the UK. Whilst there are already classification machines operating for cattle, a further aligned date of February 2027 provides for the introduction of automated classification methods for sheep. In the year leading up to February 2027, data will be collected from a large sample size in support of the formula or algorithms which will be used in setting up any new automated grading equipment before the technology is then authorised for use. Finally, the regulations also mean that any infringements will lead to enforcement procedures. The Scottish Government Meat and Livestock Inspectors will carry out unannounced inspections on behalf of Scottish ministers, record the findings and operate a risk-based approach. Whilst operators will be supported in terms of classification, reporting on the required presentation specifications, ultimately any operator found to commit an offence will be liable for a fine as laid out. I hope these remarks are helpful in setting out the rationale for the instrument, and I'm happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members? No. We now move on to the formal consideration of the motion to approve the instrument and invite the Minister to speak to and move motion S6M 19530.
Moved.
Does any member wish to debate the motion? There isn't. Thank you. Is the committee content to recommend approval of the instrument? Yes. Thank you very much. And finally, is the committee content to delegate authority to me to sign off a report on this instrument? That completes our consideration of the instrument. Thank you, Minister, and your officials for attending this morning. I now suspend the meeting for 5 minutes to allow a changeover of witnesses. Our final item on the agenda today is consideration of the Natural Environment Scotland Bill at Stage 2. And I welcome to the meeting Gillian Martin, the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero and Energy, who is supported by the Scottish Government officials. And I welcome other members who are participating in Stage 2 this morning. Officials seated at the table are here to support the Cabinet Secretary but are not permitted to speak in the debate. So I now call Amendment 115 in the name of Alistair Allen, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. And I draw members' attention to the preemption in this group as shown in the groupings. And Alistair Allen to move Amendment 115 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to move, in that case, Amendment 115 and speak to the others in the group. Forgive me if I do so a little comprehensively. I believe that the power in Part 2 of the Bill is essential to ensure that Scotland can continue to meet its environmental obligations in a way that is fit for purpose, particularly in the context of our net zero and nature restoration ambitions. I am aware of the committee's interest in these subjects, and particularly aware that Sarah Boyack has lodged a non-regression provision under Amendments 5 and 6, and Beatrice Wishart has lodged a non-regression provision under Amendment 196. Their amendments respond directly to those concerns and reflect the strong and consistent calls from stakeholders, particularly environmental NGOs, and from the committee itself, following the Stage 1 debate for a non-regression provision. However, I'm keen to ensure that any non-regression provision offers a clear and practical safeguard that supports our shared ambitions for nature restoration and tackling climate change. Use of a non-regression provision, if not appropriately drafted, might actually stifle the delivery of those ambitions, and I believe that my proposed amendments achieve the right balance when compared to other non-regression provisions that have been proposed. As a non-regression provision will introduce a legal obligation, I know the Government believes and others believe that there needs to be a proportionate and workable safeguard which strikes a balance between maintaining flexibility and ensuring accountability. And I would urge the committee to provide its support for my proposed amendments. Amendments 115, 116 and 117 all respond directly to concerns raised regarding the power in Part 2 of the Bill. These amendments introduce a non-regression provision to ensure that, crucially, any future use of the power under Part 2 does not reduce the overall standards of environmental protection, while having explicit regard for the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. Recognising that progress in one of these areas cannot be achieved without the other, and I would hope that those points are ones that we can all agree on. In addition, the powers proposed in Part 2 are required to support broader aims and cross-cutting work, particularly in relation to net zero, energy security and climate change. Additionally, in order to provide further reassurance, my Amendment 117 adds a safeguard by requiring Scottish ministers to lay a statement before Parliament confirming that they consider that the environmental protection requirement, Amendment 115, has been met. As such, I would ask the committee to oppose respectfully Amendments 5 and 6, Amendment 196 and Amendment 313, and I urge the committee to support my Amendments 115, 116 and 117. These amendments are part of a suite of amendments with the collective purpose of enhancing safeguards around the exercise of the power in Section 2.1 and directly respond to the committee's concerns outlined in the Stage 1 debate. My environmental protection requirement should not be considered in isolation to Ms Harper's Amendment 57. Part 2 of the Bill contains powers that can only be exercised if changes align with one or more of the purposes set out in Sections 3A to F. The amendment specifies that other legal regimes must be pertinent to the effective operation of the relevant EIA or habitats legislation or otherwise desirable for such legislation to interact with. I believe, therefore, that Amendment 120 represents a proportionate and practical improvement to the Bill, and I encourage members to support it. Similarly, Amendment 121 refines Purpose F in Section 3 of the Bill, and as originally drafted, this purpose allowed changes to improve or simplify the operation of the legislation. My amendment makes this more precise by clarifying that the purpose F is intended to enable administrative changes or adjustments to regulatory processes that reduce the administrative burden of complying with a condition, standard or requirement. This ensures the power is used solely for administrative and procedural improvements, such as streamlining processes, for example, updating the EIA regime to remove the need for paper copies of applications where electronic versions are already provided. I hope members will agree that this is a sensible and reasonable approach, and I therefore move Amendment 115.
Thank you. Mark Ruskell to speak to Amendment 26 and other amendments in the group.
Yeah, thanks very much, Convener. And I appreciate the comments from Alistair Allen and the amendments that are being moved by others in this group as well, to try and, I think, make sense of Part 2, because I think as a committee we really struggled to understand what the purpose was of Part 2. I think we had evidence that flexibility is required to enable the submission of PDF copies of environmental assessments, and debates and discussion was had about the need for flexibility around environmental assessment HABs regs in relation to renewable energy. But actually, what's unfolded through the evidence is that we already have that flexibility. We already have that flexibility in both the environmental assessment and the habitats regulations regimes, and that actually through the Planning and Infrastructure Bill there are improvements there which can facilitate development of renewable electricity as well, which I think the Cabinet Secretary reflected on. So I suppose at this point I'm still struggling to understand what is the point of Part 2, and that's why...
Would the member take an intervention?
Yeah.
I appreciate Mark Ruskell giving way. In your recollection, did you hear anybody supporting Section 2 at all, other than government organisations?
I didn't, Convener.
Thank you.
I didn't.
Thank you.
And I think for that reason, that's why I'm bringing forwards amendments 1, 2 and 3, which effectively delete Part 2 and putting that on the table, which enables government to, between Stage 2 and Stage 3, really to think again about what the purpose is and where we do need some flexibility. I don't think giving ministers the power, an indefinite power going forward to effectively rewrite environmental assessment and habitats regulations provisions is appropriate for a bill that is primarily about tackling the nature emergency. In theory, it could allow the watering down of 40 years worth of EU environmental legislation, and it would really sort of ignore the Parliament's desire to keep pace with European Union legislation. And yeah, I think as we've already heard, I'm struggling with the evidence to see what the case is here for that flexibility, and I think we're still struggling to really understand, within the habitats regulations and in relation to how sites are already designated and the process for that, why there isn't that flexibility to make adjustments that could assist with nature restoration. So. I'll listen to the argument. I've heard the arguments from Alistair Allen. I'd like to hear, Cabinet Secretary's reflections later on where she's got to in relation to Part 2. But I think it's important to have, this option on the table, and I will push it to the vote, because I think at least at Stage 2, we need to know where we stand, and we'll see, what amendments get passed in this group. But I suspect they'll need. I would like there to be further discussion between Stage 2 and Stage 3, because I still don't feel at the end of today it's going to really conclude the thinking on this. In terms of Amendment 26, I mean, this is picking up on committee's recommendation at Stage 1 to revisit the sunset clause on keeping pace power in the Continuity Act. I mean, that power is due to expire in 2027. We've got the option in Parliament extending it to 2031. I think this is an area where, yes, the need to adjust and amend HABs regs and environmental assessment will be needed going forward if we're to remain broadly aligned with that framework of European legislation which has protected the environment and protected the environment across Europe. And of course, nature knows no boundaries. I think in Stage 1 report, the committee noted we don't expect a change like this to have significant policy implications. It would also give the government the opportunity to undertake a thorough review the operation of EIA and HABS regs has been suggested by some stakeholders, but not breaking out of that framework of European policy. And I think that's the context for this. Obviously, you can't keep environmental legislation fixed in a moment in time, but there is a belief, Convener, that I think from all the stakeholders it gave evidence that the existing system does provide that flexibility. Where we do need flexibility, it's in relation to alignment with future EU laws, and I think 26 would give that. Anyway, that's my starting point for the discussion here, and I'll see where we get to.
Thank you. I now call Sarah Boyack to speak to Amendment 5 and other amendments in the group.
Thanks very much, Convener. Well, like the previous two speakers, I wanted to respond to the concerns raised at stage 1 by the committee, but also by a raft of stakeholders who got in touch who were worried about this section of the bill, particularly in terms of having unintended consequences, because the wide-ranging powers to modify key environmental protections. So what I wanted to do was to try and reintroduce protections back on the face of the bill. So I want to thank the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management for their support in crafting the amendments that you have in front of me. And there were 4 core aims in terms of improving the bill. So greater clarity and precision in drafting, ensuring the legislation is easier to interpret and aligned with the structure used elsewhere in this bill. A clear non-regression guarantee requiring ministers to confirm that any changes don't weaken existing environmental protections, and that would be a safeguard in line with Scots' environmental ambitions and international obligations, stronger alignment with our duties under the Habitats regulations, and ensuring that modifications respect the management objectives of the UK site network and the conservation needs of environmentally important habitats. But also, and this has been mentioned already this morning, enhanced parliamentary oversight. That's a key issue in terms of, I noted the reference of a ministerial statement being required. So my ambition was to strengthen the bill. Different ways of doing that. So my first amendment was about clarity and precision, strengthening accountability, and it was to try and improve the drafting consistency across the bill. My second amendment, number 6, was a generic non-regression safeguard to any regulations made under Part 2. And I think the comment's already been made. We have a nature and an environmental crisis, and we need to address both of these going forward. But we also need safeguarding standards. And it was, this amendment was to try and close a loophole and reinforce public trust, because environmental law should be thinking ahead, not going backwards, and to try and align with our wider commitments in Scotland on climate and environmental ambitions, and not eroding them through technical changes. Amendment 7 was to make sure that when there are regulations being considered, Scottish ministers should think about how the modification or restatement confirms their duties in terms of the UK site network and looking at habitats regulations. So again, that was to make sure that you've got consistent application in line with existing statutory duties and looking at the conservation of European sites in Scotland and not undermining management and protection of these critical habitats. It was about protecting the integrity of that UK site network and not just seeing minor technical changes having a big impact. Again, strengthening our environmental leadership, but also embedding accountability on the face of the bill. Amendment 8, it's been interesting here, Alistair Allen's speech in favour of his amendments. My version was about limiting ministerial discretion and avoiding ministers from bypassing proper parliamentary scrutiny and enhancing democratic oversight, because I think the bill as currently drafted definitely risks allowing significant changes to be made with only procedural approval. So this section was to ensure that powers can't be exercised without a full, proper legislative debate, avoids expanding authority without, that accountability, and the list in my amendment includes serious matters like arrest powers, search powers and fees. So that shouldn't just slide through under secondary legislation. It was, again, balance of power. My amendment, last two amendments, Amendment 9, was to take out sub-paragraphs, which currently there were lots of concerns raised by stakeholders at stage 1, and trying to tighten the scope of ministerial powers, preventing overreach, and really focusing on genuine policy purposes. So avoiding technical tidying up as a backdoor to weaken or dilute environmental standards and safeguards. My last amendment was again about narrowing ministerial powers, because there's a phrase, just to improve or simplify the operation of the law. That is vague, and that could lead to quite wide-ranging changes.
Would Sarah Boyack give way?
Yes.
In the same vein of the question to Mark Ruskell, we heard no evidence that the current legislation around environmental impact assessments and designations were weak or needed strengthened. What we have here is it's almost like reinventing a wheel, and Parliament having to ensure that there's no loopholes. And I'm quite sure you've made a good job in closing the loopholes that you can identify. But I just wonder, other than allowing submission of evidence through PDF or electronic methods, there was very little evidence of anything to be gained by giving the government these powers. So I would suggest, did you consider that this section was unneeded and potentially opened the problems that loopholes could bring?
Well, that actually was the purpose of my amendments, Convener, and I was engaging with stakeholders to see how could we actually fix those problems in the legislation. It's up to the members of the committee to decide what options they want to support, but I was trying to be constructive and actually increase accountability, avoid that non-regression challenge where you inadvertently reduce environmental regulations. So I was trying to be constructive and to come up with an amendment that would actually help and strengthen the bill, rather than, as you just suggested, the current wording significantly weakens environmental protection. So it's getting that joined up thinking, but also accountability. And my amendment 10 was to make sure that changes are substantive and accountable, and that we actually debate these issues openly in Parliament. It's not just a sliding under people's awareness. And I think that accountability, not just left to ministerial discretion through secondary legislation. So that was what I was trying to do, to get joined up thinking and action on climate and nature crisis, which are facing us now and are only going to get worse. So what one minister sees as simplification might in fact weaken environmental protections. So it's to actually put this on the face of the bill. So it is up to the committee members to decide how to vote. And, you know, I've been listening to Alistair Allen's suggestion about what his amendments will do. So I will listen to the debate and I'll close at that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Boyack. I now call on Beatrice Wishart to speak to Amendment 196 and other amendments in the group.
Thanks, Convener. Part 2 of the bill introduces new regulatory powers relating to nature restoration. Without a non-regression clause, there's a risk that regulations could be weakened by future governments, standards could be lowered through secondary legislation, and the overall environmental protection regime could become less robust over time. This is particularly important because nature targets are long-term, while regulations may change more frequently. My Amendment 196 seeks to address this by ensuring that any regulations made under Part 2 can only maintain or improve existing environmental standards. This non-regression safeguard ensures continuity and prevents backsliding at the implementation stage. I note other members have lodged non-regression amendments, and I believe this reflects the concerns others have alluded to and the need for such an amendment to the bill. The wording of my amendment uses maintain or improve and reflects the standard used in other major environmental statutes and provides a clear, legally recognisable threshold.
Thank you. And I call Emma Harper to speak to Amendment 57 and other amendments in the group.
Thanks, Convener. I will speak to my amendment number 57. The Cabinet Secretary, I believe, has always been clear that if this power was used to make significant changes, then the affirmative procedure should apply. And I recognise that concerns have been raised during the Stage 1 debate about the lack of clarity as to when the affirmative procedure would apply in respect of regulations made under Section 2(1). My amendment has been developed with input from the Cabinet Secretary to ensure it reflects the views expressed during scrutiny of Part 2 of the bill. I'm aware that Sarah Boyack has lodged Amendment number 8, which introduces the affirmative procedure to cover the power provided in Part 2 of the bill. However, such a blanket provision requiring the affirmative procedure would not be proportionate or an efficient use of public resources or Parliament's time. I'm therefore seeking support from the committee for my amendment number 57, as I believe it strikes the right balance, ensuring the affirmative procedure for substantive changes while allowing a negative procedure for only clearly minor technical or administrative updates. This maintains robust scrutiny where needed about creating unnecessary delays, and I believe that my amendment reflects the most efficient use of Parliament's role in scrutinising legislation. I would therefore ask members not to press Amendment 8 and instead support my amendment number 57, which clarifies the procedure in Section 2, 6 and 7 of Part 2 of the bill. So I move Amendment 57.
Thank you. Now call Ariane Burgess to speak to Amendment 58 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. Just to say, if we do have a Part 2, I want to bring this amendment forward, but I do align my concerns with those of Mark Ruskell and Sarah Boyack, who've brought forward concerns about this part. I have amendments 58 and 60, and they pick up an issue raised in evidence from the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And before I go into the details of that amendment, I just want to say that I have a strong vision for Scotland being a forest nation, but I believe that it needs to be done in a way that we recognise the very challenging context that we face, and that is a severely depleted natural environment. So the proposal for these amendments propose that new commercial forestry plantations over 50 hectares are required to carry out an environmental impact assessment. And I brought these amendments to the Agriculture and Rural Communities Bill. I believe that we need further scrutiny to make sure trees are planted in the right places, and that the creation of new commercial plantations are weighted against alternative activities such as natural woodland creation. This amendment would also ensure that public consultation as part of the EIA process is widespread, structured and transparent. Tree planting for whatever purpose needs to consider the well-being of Scotland and all of its living inhabitants. Formal consultation allows all interests to be considered and helps to legitimise the outcomes of the application process. And during the Agricultural and Rural Communities Bill, I did have lengthy discussions with Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Land Reform and Islands. I believe that the Natural Environment Bill would be an appropriate place to consider putting this amendment. Turning to my Amendment 59, this would give Ramsar sites in Scotland a statutory protection. Ramsar sites are wetlands of international importance designated under the Ramsar Convention. In Scotland, these sites are currently protected through policy which treats them as if they were European sites for the purpose of land use planning and environmental assessment. However, this protection is not enshrined in law, creating a potential uncertainty, and I think it's more than potential actually, hearing from stakeholders, and inconsistency in decision-making. Putting Ramsar protection in law would give legal certainty and ensure consistent application across Scotland. And it would strengthen our compliance with international environmental obligations to keep pace with environmental standards so that we are, now that we are out with of the EU. And I appreciate the work of RSPB Scotland for their support with this amendment.
Thank you. I now call Rhoda Grant to speak to Amendment 118 and other amendments in the group.
I want to speak to my Amendment 118 and 19 in this group, and I think we can all agree that Part 2 of the bill is one that's causing most concern. So these amendments are designed to try and improve Part 2 of the bill. Amendment 118 is aimed at ensuring a balance between climate and nature targets. My amendment deletes the words including, in particular, the net zero emissions target set by Section A1 of the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009. I believe these words are unnecessary because Part 2 of the bill gives ministers wide powers to amend environmental law to facilitate progress towards any statutory target. As drafted, this would allow changes in support of unrelated targets, e.g. energy, waste and transport, at risk of... Sorry, I'm going to sneeze. I've managed to allay that. Sorry. As drafted, this would allow changes in support of unrelated targets, e.g. energy, waste, transport, that risk weakening nature protection. Referring to climate targets specifically, risks creating a hierarchy in which nature protections are weakened to facilitate energy infrastructure and other decarbonisation efforts. Powers under Part 2 should support nature recovery as well as climate targets and ensure one is not pursued at the expense of the other. The amendment removes the implications that climate targets have priority over nature recovery targets. Amendment 119 deletes the line in Section 3C, which provide a purpose that is to ensure consistency and compatibility with other legal regimes, either domestic or international. And this purpose is too broad. It's not clear in what circumstances such a power would be necessary, and this power has the potential to be misused.
Thank you. I now call Tim Eagle to speak to Amendment 313 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. First of all, can I just talk about Mark Ruskell's amendments? Very quick, actually. Mark Ruskell submitted these, and I think that represents exactly the concern that we heard. It's not that often you get that sort of uniform concern that comes through from various different stakeholders, and I think that was really apparent. I like what Mark Ruskell's done here because my personal preference, and I would urge this to any opposition member in the committee today, is that actually if we just delete this, if we say now at stage 2, delete this, go back, think again, can really go back with to the Cabinet Secretary, really go back with those officers, civil servants behind the scene, because there's clearly a problem here. Now, there's various amendments that are floating around, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't. But fundamentally, I actually think Mark Ruskell is right to push this, delete this at stage 2, and let's have a proper debate on this once the government have taken more advice from stakeholders at stage 3, rather than trying to piecemeal amend it. Saying that, I have got an amendment, Amendment 313, which effectively is a non-regression clause that would try and protect what is currently in place, should we not delete that today. But as I say, my preference would be, and I will fully support Mark Ruskell's amendments 1, 2 and 3 to delete Part 2 at this point.
Thank you, Mr Eagle. Any other members? Oh. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to start by expressing my agreement with Dr Allen's early remarks and urge the committee to support his amendments. We worked together on them, they're 115, 116 and 117. And they are designed to alleviate the concerns by including an environmental protection requirement into Part 2 of the bill and to narrow the scope of Purpose 3C and Amendment 21, which seeks to narrow the scope of Purpose 3F. I want to put on the record, and I think I reflected this in the evidence in Stage 1, that I agree that we need to make sure that any legislation is not vulnerable to being misused by any future government who do not have biodiversity or climate goals in their sights or don't agree with them. So I'm happy to see that there's been a lot of work being done by various members on that. I don't agree with deleting Part 2 of the bill, but I'm absolutely convinced that Dr Allen's amendments are a significant step in having a safeguard put in place. And indeed, Scottish Environment Link have expressed that they are a significant step forward. I'd now like to speak to other amendments in the group, whilst recognising the attempts that members have made to introduce non-regression clauses, and the intention of them I am in agreement with, but the wording of amendment, the amendments that Dr Allen's put forward are the ones that I feel achieve the objectives in a way that I can stand beside. Amendments raised by Ms Boyack, 5 and 6, Ms Wishart, 196 and Mr Eagle all seek to introduce a non-regression provision to Part 2 of the bill, and they respond directly to those concerns that were, those understandable concerns that were raised by stakeholders and from the committee for the need for a non-regression non-regression provision. Of course, we need to decide on which non-regression provision put forward by members might want to get behind and support. So, Stage 1 debate mentioned about the breadth of the powers in Part 2, the absence of safeguards. We do need safeguards. I am in agreement with everyone on that. I hope members recognise that I agree with that. The Government shares the ambition to uphold high environmental standards. However, a non-regression provision amendment does need to offer a clearer, more workable safeguard that supports our ambitions for both nature restoration and climate change. And I don't agree that one has a priority over the other. They are both inextricably linked and they both have parity as far as I'm concerned. As a non-regression provision would introduce legal obligation, the Government believes that any provision needs to be proportionate and a workable safeguard which strikes a balance between maintaining flexibility and ensuring accountability. And I would urge the committee... Yes, I will.
Thank you for giving way. Can I just ask you, though, do you see that there is that balance already within the Habitats Directive, in the Habitats regulations? There is the overriding public interest test. It is possible, and indeed governments make decisions the whole time that have to strike a balance between climate and nature. So what's wrong with the current system that we have?
So I'm aware that in Stage 1 in the debate, Regulation 9D was mentioned, and also there are people with calls to amend the Continuity Act. If I could look at Regulation D and just explain again and outline why I don't believe that it does provide the safeguards that that people have mentioned. It includes an obligation on Scottish ministers to manage and, where necessary, adapt the UK site network with a view to contributing to the achievement of its management objectives. It's not been used in practice so far. There is obviously an implied power to comply with this duty despite the lack of specific legal provision in the Habitats regulations, but Regulation 9D only applies to the UK site network. It does not allow ministers to amend the broader 1994 Habitats regulations or the EIA regime in the way that we've set out in the policy memorandum of this bill. I'm hopeful that if one of the amendments passed that puts a non-regression provision in here, that it will effectively make sure that members can be happier with Part 2, and that it will protect against future governments who do not have environmental protection as a priority.
Would the Cabinet Secretary give way?
I haven't actually finished my...
Okay,
if I could,
apologise.
I wanted to go into, the Continuity Act was also mentioned as a way of keeping pace with the EU law, but it's a narrower power. It doesn't give us the flexibility to respond to the wider international obligations or domestic needs. And I believe that what we've put forward, yes, we need to put something in there that puts those protections in place, and that's why I'm happy for Dr Allen's amendment, which I think does that. I think we have to recognise that some of the existing regulations out there don't quite hit the mark.
Thank you. Sorry to cut across you. I was listening to what you said about 9D and the need for perhaps for more flexibility around site designations. If that is the only real purpose of Part 2, why wasn't that brought forward into this bill? Why isn't the purpose of this so narrowly defined that we're only really talking here about site designations and flexibility rather than the raft of other ways that this section of the bill could be used to amend both habitats regulations and environmental assessment?
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question. I have actually just set out how Regulation 9D doesn't give us the flexibility to be adapted to situations which require that flexibility and fleet of foot reaction. I'm confident that with the adoption of Alistair Allen's amendments, that it would allay any concerns around the not having the safeguards of non-regression in there. I set out the Stage 1 many of the reasons why we couldn't have a static situation in a situation where we have protected areas that were no longer protecting the species that they had originally been set out to protect because of the effects of climate change, because of the effect on that species. And I think that we need to have more fleet of foot response available to it. I'd also point to the fact that Emma Harper has put in there about the affirmative procedure being used for substantive amendments and changes, and I think that's right as well. So I think that with both of the amendments of Alistair Allen, the suite of amendments from Alistair Allen and Emma Harper's amendments, that should allay a lot of the difficulties that people had with it in stage 1. Yes. So I think the concerns were that Part 2 went far too far and it wasn't proportionate, and I think that's why quite a few of us have put in amendments. And I think that issue about ministerial accountability and getting that balance right, the idea about affirmative is to make sure the Parliament gets to actually formally approve it, so it doesn't just slide through. So I think it's absolutely crucial that we don't weaken by accident, and that's why I think we're all trying to test what the purpose is and what the impact is in terms of future decisions.
Yeah. And, Sarah Boyce just set out there why affirmative is extremely important for the parliamentary scrutiny of anything that future ministers might want to do, which have substantive changes. And I think that is proportionate. Of course, if we were to have affirmative procedures for all the minor and technical things that might actually be put through that actually don't have a particular, policy change or indeed material change, but they are minor and technical, I think that that would be disproportionate. So that's why I'm supportive of what Emma Harper came to me to discuss. Can I move on to talking about the other amendments? Yes.
An intervention, just on that, because I think we all have real concerns about Section 2. And obviously, some of us are trying to amend Section 2 to strengthen it and to make it less open to abuse. But we'll obviously need to take stock between stage 2 and stage 3, and if it doesn't do that, then there's the option to remove the section at stage 3. But I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary would be open to have discussions about concerns that arise if we don't think any of the amendments at stage 2 actually work. Would she be open to having discussions?
Always open to having discussions with members, absolutely. I mean, I feel fairly confident in the amendments from Dr Allen and Emma Harper that scrutiny is put in there. And I believe that there is a provision within Dr Allen's amendments in particular to make sure that no future government could weaken environmental protections. And I think that's what we all want, because we don't know. And I think that actually was a very legitimate argument from those who made it in stage 1, is, you might trust the government and you might trust even the parties that are sitting in the Parliament with regard to environmental protections right now. But we don't know what's going to happen in the future and who's going to be in government and and that any kind of misuse of this bill would not be something that we want to leave. So I actually, commend Parliament and commend the members who've actually said that we need to put provision in place so that any future government could not use anything in Part 2 to weaken environmental protections. And I think that the strength of feeling has been demonstrated by all the amendments that put through. And can I just finish my point? But I have specifically, in recognition of those concerns, worked with Dr Allen on amendments that I think strengthen them. We've obviously been testing some of those amendments with ENGOs as well, and that's why I mentioned Scottish Environment Link's comments in regard to this. Convener, you wanted to come in.
Thank you. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. So the amendments we've seen are solely to address what are seen as failures or weaknesses in the legislation in this section. What I'm lost on is the strengths of this part. What is it actually going to bring that improve what we've got at the moment? I'm still unclear. And at stage 1, you've touched on it. There was a total lack. There was not one stakeholder could identify any positives about that section. So amendments are all very well. They address weaknesses and failures and loopholes potentially in what we've got in front of us as the draft legislation. But what are the strengths that about the whole section. What is it going to bring as a positive?
So I set out in stage 1 why we actually put part 2 in. It was to address some of the gaps that have been left in legislation as a result of EU exit. And we need to make sure that we fill those gaps in as much as possible, because they do leave us with an inability to adapt given any kind of impacts or changes to particular areas as a result of climate change, as a result of anything, where they're no longer the ability to act in a fleet of foot manner. So I think, you know, there may be times when ministers have to act very quickly to align with evolving global standards on climate and biodiversity. You know, there's various examples.
Would you give
the BBNJ agreement? We have to rely on the UK government to provide us a power for Scottish ministers to amend our EIA regulations. I would much rather that we have that power already within the competence of the Scottish Government, without having to wait on another government to give us the powers to do that. So, I mean, that is a loophole that has been created as a result of EU exit. So that was the main reason for actually putting in part 2. And I believe that the main concerns around part 2 were actually on the non-regression space, not the existence of part 2. And certainly I didn't hear anything compelling that actually people, you know, with of politicians saying it should be removed wholesale. I think the concerns that I heard, and certainly I had discussions, and my advisor had discussions with Scottish Environment Link around that, it was about the non-regression and the potential for lack of parliamentary scrutiny if there was not affirmative procedure associated with substantive changes.
Thank you for giving me. There certainly was calls for it to be removed in total. I think this is probably an extreme example of a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And what we heard was it allowed government to legislate in lots of areas that are yet even to be defined, and it was far too much power. So why did the government decide to bring it in this manner rather than addressing the issues that you've highlighted? This is absolutely an example of sledgehammer to crack a nut.
Well, I don't agree with that phraseology about sledgehammers and nuts. I think that I've explained the reasoning why we put in the provisions in part 2 were to do with closing the gap caused by EU exit, the ability for Scottish ministers to have the power to act in an adaptive and swift way should they have to, without waiting on any kind of agreement with the UK government. It is not, and it's never been the policy of this government to dismantle Scotland's environmental protections. But the one area in which I would agree with members is that if we didn't have something in there which provided a safeguard, then that would leave it to other governments in the future. So, Convener, you and I are not going to agree on this, because you made very clear in stage 1 that you had already made up your mind that you wanted part 2 removed. The same with Mark Ruskell. I have worked together with Alistair Allen and Emma Harper to allay the concerns of the stakeholders so that hopefully people will be able to support part 2 in its entirety as amended. Part 2 introduces that bespoke power to modify the 1994 Habitats Regulations and legislation that forms the environmental impact assessment regime. It plugs that legislative gap that is there now as a result of EU exit. These powers are essential to ensure that we can continue to meet our environmental obligations in a way that's fit for purpose, particularly in the context of net zero and nature restoration ambitions. And as I say, I understand that as drafted, part 2 did not have safeguards in place. I'm confident that, having worked with Dr Allen and then Emma Harper, that we allay those concerns, and that if they are agreed to today, that we will have a much stronger part 2 which protects against any future governments who might want to look at if it went through as drafted, might be able to abuse the provisions in part 2. If those amendments are agreed to from Dr Allen and Emma Harper, that cannot happen, simply. I would just like to go on to Amendment 7. Amendment 7, recognise that Amendment 7 has been brought forward due to those concerns that we've heard from others in the committee and stakeholders and their evidence and the scope of proposed powers to modify environmental impact assessment and habitats regulations. And again, I recognise concerns. I can't support this amendment as there's already a duty on Scottish ministers to manage and, where necessary, adapt UK site network as specified in Regulation D. That's where Regulation D is strong. Therefore, when considering the use of this powers to amend the habitats regulations, ministers already have to have regard to Regulation 9D and any potential implications for the UK site network. So I'd ask the member not to press Amendment 7, failing which I'd ask committee to reject it. Amendment 8 introduces the affirmative procedure to cover the power provided in Part 2 of the bill. Again, I absolutely recognise the concerns that were brought up in the Stage 1 debate on the lack of clarity as to when the affirmative procedure should apply. And I've also always been clear that if this power was to be used to make significant changes, the affirmative procedure should apply. So Ms Boyack's amendment reflects this desire for stronger safeguards, but a blanket requirement for the affirmative procedure, I would argue, is not proportionate and would not be efficient use of Parliament's resource and public resources of Parliament's time, as it would have to also cover all the minor and technical changes that might be made over time. So obviously there is a judgment call to be made here. Emma Harper's amendment offers, I think, a more balanced approach, but of course both amendments have the affirmative procedure in their sights. It's just a case of whether or not the committee wants to have affirmative procedure for every minor and technical amendment we might make, which of course is their judgment call. Emma Harper.
Thank you. I appreciate the Cabinet Secretary giving way and describing a lot of detail in this, but my whole intention was to implement a more proportional approach with my amendment, so I appreciate your feedback about it, and I would just ask if she agrees that this way it would allow some more intensive scrutiny, if required, should my amendment pass.
So, if I can give an example, and this is why I do think that your amendment is proportionate. So, the procedural changes, so we heard the example there, like changing the requirement for EAI reports to be electronic only. So an administrative change, rather than paper-based, but electronic only for reasons of, efficiency, for example, would have to be gone through in an affirmative procedure. And I think that's disproportionate. Of course, the thing is, I don't run the committee. The committee may believe that all the minor and technical changes that could be made in this way, it is appropriate to have affirmative scrutiny of them in committee. And then that's entirely up to the committee. They may decide. But personally, as a parliamentarian and a former convener myself, I would see that as being taking up an awful lot of time in committee scrutiny. It could be better served. But again, it's up to the committee to decide whether or not they want that.
So one of the issues I mentioned was about new criminal offences or charges that could be created through secondary legislation. Could you confirm that that would actually be required in terms of, so being proportionate about using that opportunity?
Yeah, that example that you've just given, Sarah, is a substantive change, a sort of, a quite hefty substantive change, and of course you would expect that Parliament have the affirmative procedure in place to scrutinise anything that was around about criminality. Can I turn to Mark Ruskell's amendments 1, 2 and 3? So, as I've already said, Part 2 of the bill introduces a bespoke power to modify the 1994 habitats regulations and the legislation that forms the environmental impact assessment regime, and it plugs that legislative gap arising from EU exit. I believe that these powers are essential so that Scotland can continue to meet its environmental obligations in a way that's fit for purpose, particularly in the context of our nature restoration and net zero targets. And removing Part 2 of the bill entirely would undermine our ability to take a fast, flexible approach to tackle the twin crisis of climate change and nature loss in the face of evolving future circumstances. And I do believe it is appropriate to put safeguards into place, absolutely, but to remove the ability to adapt flexibly and fleet of foot to changing circumstances, I think would be a misstep. I recognise and accept the concerns raised by both the committee, range of stakeholders and the power taken in Part 2 is currently too broad. It is too broad, and I accept that. And it could potentially be used to dilute environmental protection, and I want to avoid that. And such is the beauty of parliamentary scrutiny in the committee process, that these concerns are raised and government is able to reflect upon them and indeed work with members to put in safeguards, and that's exactly what we've done. We're unequivocally committed to protecting our environment. The bill has not been decided to dilute environmental protection, but I fully accept that without the changes and the amendments set forward by Dr Allen and Emma Harper, that it could be misused by future governments, and we'd all want to avoid that. Amendments 58 and 60 seek to place a hard limit on any new conifer woodland creation scheme before triggering an EIA. Now, as Ariane Burgess has said, it's a continuation of amendments that were not passed, were put forward under the Agriculture Bill. My colleague Mary Goujon explained then why such a limit would not be appropriate. But I'm going to reiterate some of the reasoning here from the perspective of the Natural Environment Bill. All new planting schemes in Scotland that exceed 20 hectares are already subject to a screening assessment under the Forestry Environmental Impact Assessment Scotland Regulations 2017, and there are also strict thresholds set out in regulations where in particularly sensitive areas EIA screening is always required. If the outcome of screening assessment is that the project is likely to have a significant effect on the environment, then it would be subject to an EIA. And I want to point to for comparison, and I think Mary Goujon alluded to this in their discussion with it, Ireland introduced a mandatory 50-hectare limit back in 2001. And the sobering reality of what's happened since then, in the last 22 years, not a single forestry application in Ireland greater than 50 hectares has been established, because it's administratively too onerous. Now, we have got tree planting targets. We have got a climate change plan which has tree planting targets in it for the sequestration of carbon. Tree planting, as everyone around the table knows, is particularly important in protecting biodiversity, enhancing biodiversity and finding habitats for species that would otherwise be under threat. I'm sticking with Ms Goujon's approach on this. The wording of the definition provided in Amendment 60 is problematic. I'll take you in a second, Ariane, if that's okay. The wording of the definition provided in Amendment 60 is problematic and applies to both native and non-native conifers and is applied not only in commercial context but extends to any other purpose. And this means it could also apply to projects that seek to restore fragile Caledonian pine woods. So I think it's disproportionate, it's too broad, and the unintended consequences could be as a result of what we've seen in Ireland, which I've just outlined. I'm happy to take Ariane Burgess.
Thanks very much for taking my intervention. Just to say that I hear your point about, I hear the Cabinet Secretary's point about what's happened in Ireland, but I don't know the broader context, and it's difficult to mix apples and bananas and say they're the same thing. So I would be interested in knowing more about that context. But I think the other thing is I'm bringing this back because I'm working with stakeholders who have raised a concern around the environmental impacts of large-scale conifer plantations. And I started my debate contribution saying I certainly want to see Scotland as a forest nation, but we absolutely need to be doing it in a way that ensures that those plantations are not having a detrimental impact to all of the other things that actually you yourself just listed. So I'd appreciate a conversation with you, and maybe we can look at something to consider. Maybe it's not in this bill, but something to take forward and make sure that the environmental impacts are taken into consideration, because they are considerable. And I think, for me, the root of a lot of what I'm trying to do is we've got a public purse, it's limited, we've got a climate emergency, a nature emergency, where do we deploy that funding? And I would like to see the public sector be much more supportive of what we're trying to do in terms of climate and nature.
Yeah, and I absolutely understand the concerns around the right type of planting happening in the right type of places. That's why I was able to outline the fact that all new planting schemes that exceed 20 hectares are already subject to a screening assessment under the forestry regulations, and there's strict thresholds there. So we don't believe that the amendment as it's drafted would actually have the intent. And of course, the reason why I mentioned Ireland is because obviously our officials have actually looked at the implications of what was agreed there, and looked at, you know, they've done the work in actually looking at the impact that a similar piece of legislation or a similar amendment had in Ireland, and you know, making it too onerous for these you know, these projects to continue is something that we do need to bear in mind as well, because what we don't want to do is stop tree planting, which has all the positive effects that we've just mentioned. However, I have got better news in terms of Amendment 59 for Ariane Burgess. Ramsar sites are recognised as international important areas for wetland habitats and water birds to support through the Ramsar Convention. It's important that we do all that we can to ensure that they are protected from damage activity. It's Scottish Government's policy that listed Ramsar sites in Scotland should be treated as if they were European sites for the purposes of land use change decision making. So I'm absolutely delighted to support Ariane Burgess' Amendment 59. I hope the committee gets behind her and votes for that. But I think what we need to do ahead of stage 3 is revise some of the wording there. So if she would be happy to work with me on, I mean, Amendment 59 is almost there, but it does require a couple of little tweaks. I'm absolutely supportive of the intent around the amendment. I think it's a good amendment in terms of its intent. The wording does need a little bit of looking at. So if Ariane Burgess maybe wouldn't press it today, and then we can work on something that she can bring back at stage 3 that we can all get behind and feel confident in, I'd be very pleased. Amendment 118 and 119 and 120. Section 3 of the bill sets out the purposes for which Scottish ministers may exercise the power to make regulations under Section 2(1). These purposes are essential to ensure environmental assessment frameworks remain robust, aligned with obligations and adaptable to future needs. So the powers in Part 2 of the bill can only be exercised if changes align with one or more of the purposes set out in Section 3. However, we have heard calls from stakeholders in the committee that these purposes are viewed as too broad. Rhoda Grant's Amendments 118 and 119 would significantly narrow the purposes, and Amendment 118 removes the reference to net zero emissions targets from Purpose B. Now, that reference was included as an illustrative example to underline the importance of climate considerations in decision-making alongside other environmental and biodiversity considerations as well. Taking it out weakens the clear link between environmental regulation and Scotland's climate commitments. I say they have parity with one another. One does not supersede the other. They have absolute parity. Amendment 119 goes further by removing Purpose C entirely. Purpose C was originally drafted to ensure consistency or compatibility with other legal regimes. The provision allows ministers to ensure consistency with other relevant legal regimes. Removing it would undermine the ability to maintain alignment with international obligations and future-proof our environmental assessment system. And I think that's something that is particularly important post-Brexit, hence the reasoning that I gave earlier. Therefore, I am of the view that Dr Allen's Amendment 120 is a targeted and proportionate response to legitimate concerns that were expressed. Effectively, it narrows the scope on to the relevant EIA legislation and habitats regulations which are pertinent, and that's why I believe that the committee should support them. And for reasons I've set out, I'd ask Rhoda Grant not to press Amendments 118 and 119, instead strongly urge members to support Amendment 120. Sarah Boyack's Amendments 9 and 10 reduced the scope of Part 2 of the bill by removing two purposes for which the power may be used from Section 3. And I've already stated that I recognised the concerns that were raised. The amendments by Ms Boyack respond directly to the concerns. I completely understand the intention of them. We've had conversations about them and I have been talking to Seda Boyack about Dr Allen's amendments, which I worked with him on as well, and how I hope that Ms Boyack's Labour colleagues can agree that Dr Allen has put forward amendments that also address those concerns, but we've worked with him to make sure that the wording on that is something that we can support. Retaining public purpose E and F will maintain flexibility in how the power in Section 2 is used, but recognise the concerns Dr Allen's Amendments 121 would refine the scope of purpose to make it clear that it is to enable administrative changes or to alter aspects of regulatory processes rather than to make changes to core assessment requirements or substantive environmental standards or protections. And that means that the power can be used to utilise for streamlining processes, for modernising any procedural or administrative aspects within the EIA and habitats regimes, such as updating the EIA regime to enable removal of requirements to submit paper copies of applications or other documents alongside electronic versions of the same document. So purpose F would not allow for changes to core assessment requirements or substantive environmental protections. And I acknowledge, of course, that stakeholders have expressed their desire to see removal of purpose F entirely, citing that public purpose A could capture such a requirement, but it is unlikely we could rely on purpose A to simplify processes or reduce administrative burdens. I think we all want the red tape, unnecessary red tape, stripped away to make sure that our agencies, and indeed those having to apply for any kind of permissions, are not overburdened by unnecessary administration. So I would ask Sarah Boyack not to press amendments 9 and 10 and urge that the committee support Dr Allen's amendment 121. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. And I call Alistair Allen to wind up and press or withdraw amendment 115.
Nothing further to say other than to say that I'm pressing it.
Intervene. I'm just a bit concerned about your amendment 115, which pertains to providing extra safeguards. However, it's quite clear that it's only Scottish ministers that have to be satisfied that the overall environmental protection is not reduced. Can you set out what parliamentary oversight or safeguards there are, given that one of the powers to be exercised is to address the challenge posed by climate change, which could indeed refer to large-scale wind farms or power transmission upgrades, including pylons, whatever. But it would suggest that as long as the Scottish ministers are satisfied that they can prioritise that, it doesn't actually provide any safeguards at all, other than the ministers being satisfied, and there's no parliamentary oversight or scrutiny.
What, if I may, one of the concerns that has been expressed about Part 2 was that it might allow ministers to take Scotland's environmental policy in the opposite direction from the one we all want to take it. So amendments 115 to 117 introduce that non-regression provision. I accept that ministers obviously have to make judgments about this. But what will be done in the sight of Parliament. It's clearly essential that it will be forthcoming, I'm sure, an explanation of the Government's position at the time. But I strongly believe that amendments are the only proposed approach to a non-regression provision that is likely to strike the right balance and, in my view, from working with the Government, is likely to be drafted in a way that's workable.
Thank you for giving way. I've listened carefully to what Cabinet Secretary said, and the belief that what he brought forward effectively makes Part 2 watertight. I have my doubts, and I believe that a number of stakeholders will have their doubts about that as well. So I guess what I'm asking you is, would you be prepared to have further conversations between Stage 2 and Stage 3 if your amendments go through? Because I'm going to move the amendment to delete this whole section, because I think it would be very easy to rebuild it in a way that is proportionate. But would you be open to conversation around potential unintended consequences that may emerge, even though you've attempted to bring some safeguards through working with the Cabinet Secretary around a non-regression clause?
I'm very happy to speak to you and other members about this as the bill progresses, but I suppose what I would say would be to you that even if you are minded to remove Section 2 from the bill. I would urge you to vote for things that improve Section 2. And in my view, and again working with the government, but in my view, I believe that the amendments that I've put forward here increase the scrutiny, increase the pressure on government to move environmental policy in the right direction rather than the wrong.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 115 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we? We are not agreed. There will be a division. Those supporting the amendment, please raise your hand now. Those opposed to the amendment, please raise your hands now. Those members abstaining. So the result of the vote is 6 for, 2 against and 1 abstention. The amendment has therefore been agreed. I call Amendment 26 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with Amendment 115. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move? Moved. And the question is that Amendment 26 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. There will be division. Those in support of the amendment, please raise your hand now. Those opposed? Those wishing to abstain? Sorry, we're going to have to run that vote again. It wasn't quite clear there. Those supporting the motion, please raise your hand now. Those 26. Those opposed to the amendment, raise your hands now. Those wishing to abstain. So the result of the vote is 4 for, 5 against. The amendment has therefore not been agreed. Sorry, bear with me. I'm just suspending the meeting for a second. We'll now resume. There was some confusion over that vote. I'm going to run the vote again. This is the question is that Amendment 26 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. Those supporting the amendment, please raise your hands now. Those against the amendment? Those abstaining? The result of the vote is 3 for, 6 against, no abstentions. The amendment therefore has not been agreed. I call Amendment 5 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with Amendment 115. Sarah Boyack, to move or not move?
Not move today, Convener.
That has not been moved, so we will not consider that. I call Amendment 116 in the name of Alistair Allen, already debated with Amendment 115. Alistair Allen, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 116 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are not agreed. There will be division. Those supporting the amendment, please raise your hand now. Those against? Those abstaining? The result of the vote is 6 for, 2 against, 1 abstention. The amendment has therefore been agreed. I call Amendment 6 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with Amendment 115. Sarah Boyack, to move or not move?
Not move to date.
That's not moved, so will not be considered. I call Amendment 116 in the name of Beatrice Wishart. 196, beg your pardon, in the name of Beatrice Wishart, already debated with Amendment 115. Beatrice Wishart, to move or not move?
Moved.
That is moved. The question is that Amendment 196 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. Those in support, please raise your hands now. Those opposed? Those abstaining? And the result of the vote is 4 for, 4 against, 1 abstention. As a convener, I'll use my casting vote, and that will be 4. So the result is 5 for, 4 against, 1 abstention. The amendment has therefore been agreed. I call Amendment 197 in the name of Douglas Lumsden, already debated with Amendment 172. Douglas Lumsden, to move or not move? Beg your pardon. Tim Eagle, to move on behalf of Douglas Lumsden.
Not moved.
Not moved. That has not been moved, so will not be considered. I call Amendment 117 in the name of Alistair Allen, already debated with Amendment 115. Alistair Allen, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 117 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. There will be a division. Those supportive, raise your hands now. Those against? Those members wishing to abstain? And the result of the vote is 6 for, 2 against, 1 abstention. The amendment has therefore been agreed. I call Amendment 7 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with Amendment 115. Sarah Boyack, to move or not move?
Not move to date.
That's not been moved, so will not be considered. I call Amendment 57 in the name of Emma Harper, already debated with Amendment 115. And I remind members that if Amendment 57 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 8 down to preemption. Emma Harper, to move or not move?
Move, convener.
The question is that Amendment 57 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are not agreed. Those members in support, please raise your hand now. Those members opposed? Those members wishing to abstain? The result of the vote is 7 for, 1 against, 1 abstention. The amendment has therefore been agreed. I now call Amendment 1 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with Amendment 115. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move? Moved. The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. There will be division. Those supporting the amendments, raise your hands now. Those members opposed? Those members wishing to abstain? And the result of the vote is 4 for, 4 against, 1 abstention. I use my casting vote as convener to support the motion. So that is 5 for, 4 against, 1 abstention. The amendment has therefore been agreed. I now call, just bear with me. I call Amendment 58 in the name of Ariane Burgess, already debated with Amendment 115. Ariane Burgess, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 58 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. Those supporting the motion, please raise your hands now. Those opposed? Amendment 58. Those which... Certainly, I'll call that vote again. The question is that Amendment 58 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. Those supporting the motion, raise your hands now. Those members opposed? Those members abstaining? The result of the vote is 1 for, 8 against, 0 abstentions. The amendment has therefore not been agreed. I call Amendment 59 in the name of Ariane Burgess, already debated with Amendment 115. Ariane Burgess, to move or not move?
On the grounds of what the Cabinet Secretary said, not moved.
That's not been moved, so will not be considered. I call Amendment 118 in the name of Rhoda Grant, already debated with Amendment 115. Rhoda Grant to move or not move?
Not moved.
That's not moved, so it will not be considered. I call Amendment 198 in the name of Douglas Lumsden, already debated with Amendment 172. Tim Eagle to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 198 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. Those supporting the amendment, please raise your hand now. Those members opposed? Those members wishing to abstain? The result of the vote is 2 for, 7 against, no abstentions. The amendment has therefore not been agreed. I call Amendment 119 in the name of Rhoda Grant, already debated with Amendment 115. And I remind members that if Amendment 119 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 120 down to preemption. Rhoda Grant to move or not move?
Not moved.
That has not been moved, so it will not be considered. I call Amendment 120 in the name of Alistair Allen, already debated with Amendment 115. Alistair Allen to move or not move?
Moved.
So the question is that Amendment 120 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are not agreed. There will be division. Those supporting the amendment, please raise your hands now. Those members opposed? Those members abstaining? And the result of the vote is 6 for, 2 against, 1 abstention. So that motion has been approved. I call Amendment 9 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with Amendment 115. Sarah Boyack to move or not move?
Not moved today.
That has not been moved, so will not be considered. I call Amendment 199 in the name of Douglas Lumsden, already debated with Amendment 172. Tim Eagle to move or not move?
Not moved.
That has not been moved, so will not be considered. I call Amendment 10 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with Amendment 115. And I remind members that if Amendment 10 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 121 down to preemption. Sarah Boyack to move or not move?
Not moved today.
That's not been moved, so it will not be considered. I call Amendment 121 in the name of Alistair Allen, already debated with Amendment 115. Alistair Allen to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 121 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are not agreed. Those supporting the amendment, please raise your hands now. Those members opposed? Those members wishing to abstain? So the result of the vote is 6 for, 2 against, 1 abstention. The amendment has therefore not been agreed. I call Amendment... I beg your pardon, it has been agreed. That was agreed. I call Amendment 313 in the name of Tim Eagle, already debated with Amendment 115. Tim Eagle to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 313 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. There will be division. Those supporting the amendment, please raise your hand now. Those members opposed? Those members wishing to abstain? So the result of the vote is 4 for, 4 against, 1 abstention, and I'll use my casting vote. So that's 5 for, 4 against, 1 abstention. The amendment has therefore been agreed. I call Amendment 2 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with Amendment 115. Mark Ruskell to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 2 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. There will be division. Those supporting the amendment, please raise your hands now. 2. Those members wishing to oppose? Those members abstaining? So the result of the vote is 5 for, 4 against, no abstentions. The amendment has therefore been agreed. I now call Amendment 60 in the name of Ariane Burgess, already debated with Amendment 115. Ariane Burgess to move or not move?
Not moved.
It has not been moved, so it will not be considered. I call Amendment 200 in the name of Douglas Lumsden, already debated with Amendment 172. Tim Eagle to move or not move?
Sorry, Convener, not moved.
It's not been moved, so it will not be considered. Call Amendment 3 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with Amendment 115. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move?
Moved.
And the question is Amendment 3 agreed to? Yes. No. We are not agreed. There will be division. Those supporting the amendment, please raise your hand now. Those members against? Those members wishing to abstain? The result of the vote is 5 for, 4 against, no abstentions. The amendment has therefore been agreed. I'm going to suspend the meeting for a couple of minutes to allow a changeover in witnesses. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back. As a convener, I've taken the decision to halt process on stage 2 currently, given that the next section is a whole, almost standalone section related to national parks. And what I don't want to do is curtail any debate that might take place. So I'm minded to suspend the meeting today and we'll resume consideration of part 2 next week. I suspend this meeting.